Добро утро на всички. Да, ще помоля само за търпение на 2 минутки.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to ask you to be patient for 1 or 2 more minutes, and then I'll open the event officially. Thanks.
No worries. You can't hear me so far because I was just talking with my colleagues and checking the line of the speakers today. But I can officially start now. Sorry for the small delay. Welcome everyone to Zazimiata's conference about sustainable heating and renovation of buildings. Today is the third day of the conference devoted to the renovation wave and also some new policy developments in the heating sphere. Добро утро, дами и господа. Добре дошли на третия ден от конференцията на За земята.
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the third day of the conference of За земята and the Black Sea Energy Research Center. It's a conference on sustainable domestic heating and renovation of buildings. Today is the third day of the conference, which we've devoted to the latest policies and trends, which are currently topical not only in the EU, but also worldwide. We are also going to talk about the Renovation Wave initiative. We're going to see how 3 countries, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania, go about this initiative.
I will switch to English now for a few very brief instructions on using Zoom. Just a second. Well, yes, the session will be streamed and recorded, and okay, it will be streamed in the YouTube channel of За земята, and then you can find the recording there as well. So here are the instructions. Maybe the most important button today is the interpretation button, which will allow you to switch to your preferred language, English or Bulgarian. How to use the chat in the Q&A session. We would recommend to post in the chat some technical questions, your remarks and comments, which would not be visible to the whole audience, only to the panelists. And because of that, it's better to ask your questions towards the speakers in the Q&A button to the right. Then everyone will be able to see them. And in the Q&A session, which will follow the 2 panels, you can ask your question yourself by raising your hand, and then we will give you the word to ask your question. И отново ще разкажа слайдовете на български.
I'm going to say the same thing again in Bulgarian this time.
Чрез който може да изберете канал английски или български, на който да слушате конференцията. Препоръчваме да използвате чата за задаване на технически въпроси, както и да споделяте свои коментари или рефлекции, докато е по-добре в Q&A бутона да задавате своите въпроси към лекторите ни, така че да бъдат видяни от останалите ни гости от публиката, не само от панелистите. От предишните дни получихме обратна връзка, че е добре да кажем няколко думи.
In previous days we got feedback as to the fact that it would be a good idea to say something about the settings of the screen. Well, anyhow, it is up to you, but the screen that you can see the speaker currently can either be expanded or zoomed in, depending on what you prefer.
And then I will mention very briefly today's topics. We start with the policy panel, discussing some up-to-date trends for example, phasing out of fossil gas use in the heating sector, but also coal and oil use. We will talk about the electrification of the heating sector and what will be its role. And another very topical topic is the hydrogen and everyone's asking what should be its role in the heating sector. And a bit later today, Jan Rosenov from the Regulatory Assistant Project will talk about it. But before that, Konstantin Zerger from Deutsche Umwelthilfe will make the connection between the expansion of the existing fossil gas infrastructure in Europe and how it will affect the heating sector. After him, Johannes Wallmüller from Global 2000 or Friends of the Earth Austria will share some very interesting new updates and developments of the efforts of his country on decarbonizing the heating sector. And last in this panel, we'll talk my new colleague, Rory Foster, presenting some very interesting updates from the Netherlands on their efforts for decarbonizing and phasing out the gas use in the heating sector. Then in the second panel today, we'll talk more about the renovation wave with 3 case studies from Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary. The speakers today will present to us the main renovation plans in their national recovery and resilience plans. And then we'll discuss if the countries are preparing well for taking up the renovation wave challenge, and if they are taking proper care for their energy poor citizens. And now I should give the floor to our first speaker, Konstantin from Deutsche Umwelthilfe. Konstantin, could you please turn on your camera and share your presentation?
Hi, good morning. I can't start my camera. I think you still have to change that on the technical side.
It should be done now. Try again.
I try again. Now it's working. So thank you very much. I'm also trying to share my screen. Just give me a second. So hope it works out the way it should. Here we go.
Thank you. Meanwhile, I will post in the chat the 2 streaming links for YouTube for today, so you can share it with friends or colleagues or just watch afterwards.
So now I hope everything is working and you can see my screen and the presentation. So, okay.
Yes, in full mode. Thank you.
Very well. So thanks a lot for the opportunity to speak here. It's a really intriguing and very important issue, something we are also working on. How is the heating sector developing? What role will gas play in that? And what infrastructure is needed for that? And what changes in infrastructure? So Deutsche Umwelthilfe is in English Environmental Action Germany. We are an NGO working on a number of issues. In the past, another big campaign has been the Dieselgate affair of Volkswagen and other German car makers. And we started an extensive campaign against new fossil gas infrastructure in Germany, trying to look at all sides of the issue, also including heating as well. And I think a number of my colleagues have joined the conference already. So we are really happy to contribute to this. I'll be talking about Nordstrom II today, which is Europe's biggest fossil fuel project currently underway. And of course, it's tremendously important when we look at not only how the energy sector in Germany and Europe will develop in the future, but also when we look at the heating sector, as most or the biggest share of gas is going to the heating sector actually in Germany. Before I start talking about Nord Stream 2, I want to highlight that this is not just one single project. Of course, it's a big project and it's also a symbol, and it has, or it would have a tremendous impact on several aspects, not only on the energy sector, also on our climate targets, but also on geopolitical connections and things, which are not our main focus. Our main focus is, of course, the environmental side. But I would like to give you an idea that although we acknowledge this great importance of Nord Stream 2, it's unfortunately not the only project of this scale in Germany currently underway. We've seen 3 other ones. LNG terminals, liquefied natural gas, new terminals which are sought to be built to import mainly fracking gas from the US. No such terminal does exist in Germany right now, and there is significant drive for this from policymakers. And there are 2 sites that are under consideration in Brunsbüttel, Stade, and Wilhelmshaven, all 3 of them on the coast of the North Sea. And fortunately, we've been able, together with partners, to stop already 1 of those, 2 more to go. And of course, we are still fighting against Nord Stream 2, because all these projects are of great importance how the gas sector is going to develop. Those LNG terminals, I will leave them aside right now. I just want to mention that it's a big part of our campaign. We are not only fighting against Russian gas, that's sometimes something people are telling us, why are you fighting against Russian gas? We're also fighting against any other kind of gas, because we want to consider it as a fossil fuel. We want to make clear that if we are talking about projects of this scale, then we have to put climate targets first. And as this is already part of an energy transition, we always have to ask the question how this is going to contribute. And it's not looking good. When we're talking about Nord Stream 2, and I quickly take you through this, then it's important to note that it's not completed. It's important to note because the Russian side and also the Nord Stream company and Gazprom are trying to tell us that it's more or less completed, but that's not true. I think that's part of disinformation campaign that wants to make us believe that resistance is futile, but that's not true. When we look at the German side, and these are the German coastal waters and the German exclusive economic zone and the Baltic Sea, then there's still a missing link inside the German EEZ. That other part, the purple line we see here, has already been completed, but still some 14 kilometers are missing, and a much longer link is still missing in Danish waters. So although a great part of the pipeline has been completed, there are still missing links. So it still makes sense to organize some opposition against that. Yeah, there are some more details. I will really quickly go through this. That's important in the German context because we have seen those news from Moscow 2 weeks ago that the pipeline has been completed and will be filled by gas, which is definitely not true, and which is probably part of some power game that's going on in the background, trying to influence negotiations between Russia and Germany. But I want to highlight that it's pretty clear that there's still a missing link. So this is opening the door for us to take further legal steps against this pipeline. And this is what we're doing. We're trying to prevent the completion of the pipeline in German coastal waters and the German EEZ. Same way we try to prevent the LNG terminals from being built, because once that infrastructure is there, there's a great risk that it will be fully utilized. And if it's fully utilized, then it's going to be a tragedy for our climate targets. When we look at the climate impact of Nord Stream 2, then it stands for 100 million tons of CO2 per year if it's fully utilized. 55 billion cubic meters of fossil gas per year is the capacity. And well, this would add up to existing emissions. We also, what we haven't done, and that's important to note as well, is that we didn't include upstream methane leakages. So this is the sheer carbon content of the fossil gas transported to Germany. The methane emissions, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but methane is the main component of fossil gas. It's leaking all over the infrastructure. Most of the leakages can be prevented through technical measures, but independent measurements show that although you're trying to do that, you're always going to see emissions, and there are also some emissions that can't be avoided from a technical side. And methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas. It's close to 90 times as strong as CO2. So even very few amounts of it are having a great effect. And this is not in this calculation. And that's already one of the points we are raising in our legal proceedings against Nord Stream II, because those emissions have not been considered during the permitting phase in Germany at all. So we are building a pipeline that's worth 100 million tons of CO2, and we've never asked the questions what actually the emissions will be from this project, and we haven't asked the question what the upstream emissions are. We are trying to use a clause from the permit to reopen the proceedings again. We think it has been unlawful to ignore this, and we are currently in court over this. Unfortunately, this case doesn't have an extending effect. So Nord Stream II is still allowed to continue the construction works, but it might become an important issue when the pipeline is put into operations. There are also other cases, and I'll come to that later, because that's actually one of the really amazing things, but it's not amazing. It's actually really, really scary because we are planning this kind of infrastructure without considering the impact on climate targets. And that does not only go for Nord Stream II, it does also go for other infrastructure projects like the LNG terminals I've mentioned. And it also goes for highways in Germany, for example. So that's a really big problem in our legal system. And through our cases in court, we try to kind of close this gap and try to make the case that this is needed. And of course, we got a lot of tailwind from the constitutional ruling we saw in April, as our constitutional court said that actually climate protection is a constitutional right to everybody that has to be considered in every decision taken by public authorities. So the pipeline will have a tremendous impact on our climate targets as the biggest fossil project in Europe. But when we look at the economic side of things, it's also pretty clear that it's not even needed. So what I'm showing here is from the German NECP, the National Energy and Climate Plan, that every EU member state has had to submit to the European Commission at the end of 2019. Germany was late doing that, only delivered that plan last summer in 2020. And interestingly, in the NSCP, the government has also included a projection how the gas sector is going to develop. And that's what you're seeing here, what's highlighted from 2021 to 2030. We see that our government actually expects a decline in gas use by 8%. And then another decade ahead, from 2020 to 2040, the government even expects a decline by more than 40%. And those are numbers that have been approved by our cabinet. So it's not coming from some I don't know, greenish government office somewhere in the lower decks, so to speak, but it's coming right from the cabinet. And it's coming from the same cabinet that's trying to argue for Nord Stream 2 all the time. So what we're seeing is that there are a lot of contradictions. It's obvious that if we want to achieve our climate targets, we can't use that infrastructure and that pipeline. It's also obvious that there's not a business case for it. It's also obvious that the government even doesn't expect the need for that gas. So what remains that it's probably built out of completely other reasons, which is a big problem because it will have an effect and it might change these numbers once it's put into operations. Another thing that's important to mention, and you're going to hear more about this in the program later, is the role of hydrogen. There's often the argument from the supporters that Nord Stream 2 can be used to import hydrogen to Germany and Western Europe. And Nord Stream 2 themselves, they say that a maximum of 70% of hydrogen could be transported by the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which is still saying that 30% of fossil gas will remain. That's actually interesting because we also need to consider the energy density of hydrogen and methane. The energy density of methane, fossil gas, is much higher than that of hydrogen. So the actual CO2 reduction that will come from that will be much lower than those 70% are suggesting. So even if we consider this scenario, then it would still remain a fossil pipeline to a large extent. But what's even more important is that we currently don't see a significant production of green hydrogen in Russia. There is a lot of talk about it, of course, but it's rather talk about blue or turquoise hydrogen, which is produced from fossil fuels using CCS or methane pyrolysis. Don't want to go into those technical details, but both is pretty unsecure, expensive, and basically a strategy to prolong the lifetime of the fossil gas industry, from my point of view. And as it's not available right now and in the foreseeable future anyway, we consider this as, maybe only a diversion from what is really at stake here and what this is really about. That's about increasing the exports of fossil gas from Russia and to create a new dependency on fossil gas. The talk about hydrogen, I think is nothing that's taken really serious, but it plays an important role in the public debate. We have to pick this up and we have to make clear that this is, the diversion it is in reality. Looking at our legal cases, that's already the last slide I've brought. We took a number of actions against Nord Stream 2. In July 2020, we started a lawsuit against the national regulator, Berg am Stralsund, the mining authority that's responsible for a part of the permit. In that case, we are challenging the original permit, and it's about those climate consideration and the methane emissions coming from upstream sources I already mentioned. In December last year, we made a legal objection against new construction works in Germany. They started beginning of December as a surprise to everybody. And we have been successful in delaying those activities. So Nord Stream 2 was not able to complete the construction works as they originally planned. Then in January this year, we filed another legal objection against a new permit that was issued that was about allowing construction works also between January and May, which isn't allowed because that's the bird resting time. And we're actually talking about a protected area here for birds where those construction works are taking place. And then in April 21, we started another lawsuit against this permit because it was issued against our objection anyway from the national regulator. And that's kind of a common theme we see, that the German regulators are using every opportunity to make it easy for Nord Stream 2. They trying to use every legal opportunity to make construction works possible. And it's really a difficult fight for us because the regulator is more or less ignoring most of the arguments we have and is teaming up with Nord Stream 2. Another issue that's at stake is a number of cases we now have against a foundation which was founded in the state of Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, one of the federal states, the one where at the Baltic Sea, where the pipeline will come to Germany. That foundation was founded by the federal state, and they said it's going to promote climate protection, but in reality, it's only there to shield Nord Stream 2 companies involved against possible sanctions from the US. So they are abusing the law for foundations, and we are challenging this in court as well, in particular because they're saying that this is about climate protection, which it is not at all. So there are a number of cases, and those are only the most important ones. We are trying to use every opportunity to stop Nord Stream 2, and if we can't stop it, then we try to use every legal opportunity to prevent it from going into operation, which will still be a while. We always have to consider when we talk about Nord Stream 2 that there is a lot of wrong information in the room. There are strong interests behind this. So my main message here is that this is actually a big project that's challenging our climate targets. It's something we as an environmental group are strongly opposing, and we'll take every legal option we have to stop that. And it's a still open fight. So I still have hopes that we will be able to stop this at the very end. Yeah, that's it about Nord Stream 2. Thanks a lot. And if there are any questions, then I'm happy to answer them, of course.
Thank you very much, Konstantin. Yes, if you have questions for Konstantin's presentation, you can post them in the Q&A section, and he will answer after the next presentations. Indeed, very interesting presentation. I would like to stress what you said about the sufficiency of the existing gas infrastructure, not only in Germany, but throughout the whole of Europe. And to make a small comparison with Bulgaria, where currently only 3% of the households are using fossil gas for heating. And with the new climate realities and policies at European level, we really don't need to walk in the households and increase their dependence on fossil gas for the years to come. As Nord Stream 2, we are also having some contradictional projects. For example, last year, for only 1 year, was built the Balkan Stream, or as it is also known, Russian Stream in Bulgaria, while the gas interconnector with Greece has been under construction for more than 12 years already, and it's expected sometime next year. Our views as another environmental organization is that if utilities really believe that there is some future in the fossil gas before using these pipes for hydrogen, they shouldn't use public money to build this new infrastructure. So yeah, if they believe in this, they should make the business case for it and not invest private funds. But now let's switch to Austria and hear from Johannes about the latest developments his country is taking on for decarbonizing the heating sector. Johannes, can you please share your presentation?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. I'm Johannes Wallmüller. I'm working for Friends of the Earth Austria Global 2000. And I'm happy to give you some insights about the developments that we have now so far in Austria. And I start my presentation. So I want to talk to you about the developments in Austria, what is on the one hand the federal government planning, what is in the coalition agreement, and what is also maybe worth to note on the level of the federal states. As you might know, Austria is a very federal country. So we have a federal government, but we also have, even though Austria is very small, we have 9 federal states, and they also are actually responsible for the heating sector. So they have a special role here. First of all, I want to tell you that we did a survey recently, like in the last couple of weeks, and this was very positive from the results regarding clean heating. 80%, like 4 out of 5 Austrians in the survey said they are for them it's really important that we have clean heating, that we use climate-friendly energy sources for the heating. So this is actually quite an image where we see that the population itself is in generally very in favor of steps in that direction. I share only a few results of this survey. If you're interested, we can have much more on this. It's also on our webpage. But what we also see very relevant from a policy perspective is that also 75% support a kind of renewables act, also in the heating sector, that will regulate or require that fossil heating systems will be replaced by climate-friendly solutions. So what is under discussion is a regulation that when you are changing a heating system, then it should not be allowed to change again to a fossil fuel-based system, but you have to change to a climate-friendly solution. So this is also broadly supported. And further, we also saw that about a third of the population, they plan or think about investments in their actual home. So they will take steps in the next years, 3 years we asked. So whether it's a change of the window, whether it's a full retrofit of buildings, or whether it's a change of the heating system. So there are different forms they can do. But it's actually positive that a lot of people really think about investing in their homes and their buildings. And of course, they need also support and kind of subsidies or better framework. And there we found out that only 12% were aware that there is public spending or public subsidies and that these subsidies increased, and we will come later to that. But this is also one of the challenges that we have so far now, that on the one hand, you need the good framework, the political framework, but on the other hand, people have to know about it and also have to know about the subsidies and the subsidy schemes that are in place since and have changed since last year. So first of all, but we see broad support for clean heating in the population. Also, the coalition agreement did a lot of kind of agreements or enshrined a lot of agreements already. It is actually, the Austrian coalition agreement is very clear in the building sector, much clearer than in many other sectors, I would say. And as you might know, Austrian government is now formed by, on the one hand, the Conservative Party, and for the first time in the Austrian history, also the Greens are part of the government. So my former boss, Leonore Gewessler, she's now environment minister, climate minister, and she's also in charge of implementing this agreement. So first of all, to give you maybe the main headlines here as well, Austria wants to become climate neutral by 2040. So climate science tells us in Austria that would mean that by 2040, we have to phase out all fossil fuels. So it would not be possible to get climate neutral and at the same time really have considerable amounts of fossil fuels still in the energy system. So that would not be possible. So this is yet to be defined also in a Climate Change Act. Also that shall be reformed in Austria, but this is the target of the government. Then we want to increase our renovation rate to 3%. So actually Austria has about 1.4%. So this would be more or less double of the amount of retrofitting buildings that we have so far. And that would of course mean a lot of green jobs that we can create. So our analysis shows that more than 100,000 jobs can be created by that. So that's actually very good news. Also, when we want to come out of the crisis, when we want to create jobs after the COVID, also economic and health crisis, then this would be one of the sectors where also the government identified it's very important to really get active here. As part of the Corona economic aid programs, the government also increased the subsidies for retrofitting buildings. So for the years 2021 and 2022, we now have in Austria 650 million euros as support measures. So these are subsidies if you want to change your heating systems, if you want to retrofit in buildings. And that's what I said before in our survey, but we found out that a lot of people just don't know that it's existent. So that's still an issue for marketing, for getting the awareness. But in general, that's a good news that we have this subsidy. What we also, of course, say that we need a longer perspective if we want to reach 3% renovation rate than 2 years. So the government already agreed on that and said, also formally, that this should be prolonged. But I don't know how is it in your countries. In Austria, budgets are usually made for 1 or 2 years. So this is what we have actually really formally agreed now. So before this Corona aid programs, this subsidy was also existent, but it was like 40 million euros. So this actually a really big increase. And additionally, to this subsidy, we will have 100 million euros only for the fight of energy poverty. So there we expect subsidies up to 100% of the investment costs. So, but this is yet to be defined and shall be implemented soon. But so government really changed or increased the budgets for this kind of measures really a lot. So the other part of the coalition agreement is that it's very clear on a phase out of oil and gas heating systems. So, and here we have again a differentiation. On oil, it's much clearer than on gas. What we have is, for instance, that all oil heating systems shall be replaced by 2035. And there we have also a stepwise approach. So that would mean actually by now we should have a regulation that I mentioned before, this Renewable Energy Act, where we would have then regulation that requires that in the case you change a heating system, you will not change it again to an oil heating system. So that would not be allowed actually by now. So this should happen already. It's a bit delayed, this regulation. It should be already in place, but we expect to have it soon. It's now under discussion, under negotiation, and we hope that it will come into force soon. But this is actually also part of the coalition agreement. And a second step would be that in 2025, also old oil heating systems that are older than 25 years, they should be replaced mandatory. So the first would be if you, by your choice, change your heating system, then it should be replaced by climate-friendly system. But by 2025, old oil heating systems that are really old, like 25 years and older, they have to be replaced mandatory. It's still under discussion how long the period of change should then be, but it's clear that by 2035, all of them should then be replaced. So this would be on oil, and yeah, as I said, we expect the results soon. And on the gas, the government agreement says that we want to have no new gas heating systems in new buildings from the year 2025 onwards. So this is also one regulation that we expect very soon. What we still have a lot of discussion is that we have in Austria around 600,000 oil heating systems and 900,000 gas heating systems. So what do we do with all the already existent gas heating systems? That's still a discussion going on. And that's something we expect in a second phase of this legislation package to be addressed as well. There's a lot of discussion going on, and I expect maybe in your countries as well, as the gas industry is claiming that this will be all green gas, and I come to that later onwards a bit. But this is what actually the government plans. I said to you already, Austria is a federal system. So that means actually the government is acting, but from the constitution of Austria, the federal states, they would be in charge for the building sector. So we have 9 federal states, and we did a study. It's called Wohnbau check. It's a check of their legislation. It's actually not so easy to do this because all these 9 federal states have totally different methodology and so on, and different legislation. But we did benchmarks, and we assessed them on what we need for Paris compatible policies in place, and what you have in place. And there you see actually big difference between the federal states. The main difference are some have actually very, actually moderate renovation rates up to 1%. Some have only 0.1%. Some federal states have very high efficiency standards when it comes to new buildings, when it comes to retrofits. Some are like a bit, let's say, more lacking behind that. Some are quite strict when it comes to, we don't want to have new fossil heating systems in place in new buildings, for instance. Some are like more lagging behind on that one. So, and then you come to a ranking. If you would be in the green part, this would be like compatible with Paris Agreement. Yellow would be okay, it's going in the right direction, and red would be okay. There we have major problems. So, and if you would see like Vienna in this edition, would be on the first place, and I come to some examples what Vienna did and why it is in our assessment more advanced actually than other federal states in Austria. So there's also a lot of things that federal states or cities can do. In Austria, Vienna would be a federal state and a city, of course. And one of the things Vienna did in the last years is also we have climate zones in spatial planning. So below you see a picture of a spatial plan of the 2nd district of Vienna. And in these spatial plans for climate policy measures, the most important requirement is that in these zones it would be not allowed to build buildings with a fossil heating system. So these plans are actually quite, it's quite a work to do. So we expect these plans to be ready until the end of this year for whole of Vienna. And when these plans are ready, then this would mean that 80% of new buildings will be without fossil fuels already. So well before the state of the coalition agreement of 2025 for all buildings, like at least the major part of it. So our demand is, of course, that we want to have no new buildings with fossil fuels, but this is actually something a city can do, and a step in the right direction, of course. The second thing is what I said before, this regulation for like a renewable heating act that requires that if you change a heating system, it should be not changed again to a fossil heating system. This is something that is already in place in Vienna for not for all buildings, but for like a family store or a single household store buildings, like a big part of the buildings that already have or still have well heating systems are now under this regulation. So we of course want to have this for all buildings and not for part of the buildings, but Vienna is the first federal state that has this regulation at all. So that's something also a city can do. The other regulation was that as a first step, also no new decentralized gas heating systems are allowed. So if you are in one of these zones, the 20%, and you still want to build or heat a building with a gas heating system, it would be only allowed to use a central heating system. The purpose behind this that also these buildings they shall replace their heating systems in the next couple of years or decades. And it would be much easier if they have a central heating system to connect them to the district heating system than if you would have to change each and every gas heating system from each and every apartment store or flat. So that's also one regulation that came into place. And that's actually the work now. Vienna is now making a plan for the decarbonization of the whole building stock. This plan shall be ready until the end of 2022. So, and this is actually the work they do. How much district heating do we need? How much heat pumps do we need? How do we replace the gas heating system? So this is already underway, and yeah. Actually, there is also Vienna advanced. Other federal states are not so advanced at the moment. But this is also an important work that federal state cities can do. And what is also important for us, and I come to that also maybe for a minute, is that also the Vienna federal government stated very clear that if we have renewable gas, if we have green gas, we want to use it for the grid stabilization. We want to use it for maybe electricity production when it's really needed, but we don't want to use it in buildings for heating purposes because we think it's very scarce and very expensive technology, and we don't want to use it for the heating of buildings. So that's also very important for us because this is a big discussion now in Austria. Maybe one word on that. Also, the gas industry in Austria is claiming we don't have to get away from gas heating system because we will make that greening the gas. I think it's discussed in many countries now. If you want to look at the Austrian situation, we have 8.8 billion cubic meters of gas consumption in a year. And this is already what the gas industry provided as potential. So it's like half. It's way too high, so it's not possible to make this out of waste and agricultural crops. So we say it's much lower, and actually even our assumption or our potential is based on many requirements that we have to meet first in order to do that, like reduction of meat consumption, less waste, less food waste, and so on. So otherwise, also this potential would be too high. So, and if you think in future, we may have some hydrogen, and also this is expensive. So also we and also other analysis of experts comes to the conclusion, we can only meet maybe a half of the actual consumption. So therefore we have to prioritize where we use this, this energy carrier. And we, and also the ministry presented a study like a week or 2 weeks ago. There's no room for green gas in buildings. So this is very important to note. And this is an ongoing discussion we have in Austria on the federal state level, on the federal level. So it's everywhere at the moment. And this is also one argument we put in place. We did an analysis about the costs. And here you see like biomethane and the costs. And here you see district heating, heat pumps. Here you would have biomass from residues and so on. And it's even cheaper to change to alternative systems, even to install a new heating system and change it than to use green gas in the heating system, heating sector. So this is also for the consumers, it's actually a relevant choice not to go to this direction of using green gas in the heating system. So, but this is actually the ongoing discussion we have now in Austria, and where we hope that we convince a lot of the decision makers to really also have concrete plans for decarbonization of the whole heating system, for getting out of oil and of gas heating systems. And so far we convinced them in Vienna. Maybe we will convince them in other parts of Austria soon. So that's our ongoing work. And yeah, I'm happy to answer your questions if there are any. And thanks for your attendance so far. And I hope you will have a very good conference in the next couple of hours and days.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Indeed, the households, as you showed from your survey, are very much in favor of climate solutions. Just they need to have at their disposal different financial instruments and access to programs which can facilitate their transition towards clean heating. We still don't have ongoing debate about the role of fossil gas in the heating, neither should we ban it for new buildings, but tomorrow we'll have a panel to discuss with construction sector professionals. Do they feel ready for taking up the challenge and contributing to the decarbonization of the building sector and the implementation of the Paris Agreement? And now I am happy to give the floor to Jan Rosenov, who is our speaker from the previous edition of the heating conference. And today he was so kind to speak to you about the new developments and new studies, discussing the opportunities for using hydrogen in the heating sector, if they are such. But yeah, Jan, thank you. And you have the word now.
Good morning, everyone. I hope it's equally sunny where you are. It is a sunny day in Oxford after a lot of rain. I'm going to talk about hydrogen and whether or not it has a future in heating. I know many of the other speakers have already said quite a few things about it. I hope I can complement that with my presentation. I'm going to share my screen now. I hope that will work and you can see it in a minute. Hang on, I just need to authorize my system to do that. Bear with me just a second. For some reason, it needs extra authorization this morning.
Take your time.
Will have to happen. I apologize for that. Just a sec. I think it is because it is a screen recording and I haven't done that before with Zoom. So I just need to figure out how that works. And I've had this problem before. Apologies. Yeah, okay. I need to quit and reopen. Just give me 30 seconds. I'll be right back.
Well, I would invite you again to write your questions in the Q&A section. And while we are waiting for Jan, yeah, I would like to discuss very briefly another aspect of Johanna's presentation about the different ambition between the federal states and how important it is to have forerunners after which the whole country will follow. And in this case, yeah, we can see Vienna is doing this, but also not only on the level of individual heating, but also on domestic heat. And yeah, I will have such question for you in the Q&A session. But now Jan is back.
I'm back, but I can't use my video because I'm not a panelist, I think, and I can't share my screen yet. If you make me a panelist, I think I should be able to.
Yes. You should be able now.
Thank you. Hopefully this works now. Yep, I think this is going to work. Apologies for that. I don't know why this didn't work in the first place. I've used it many times before. Right, so let me jump right in. I will start with a high-level view of hydrogen and then look at some of the reasons why I think it is going to be very challenging to replace current fossil fuels with hydrogen, at least at a very large scale. And I will also look at some of the costs involved in doing that and share some of the most recent cost studies that have been done by others. So just before I do that, I wanted to share this slide, which Mike Liebreich has put together. Hydrogen is being sort of discussed as the Swiss Army knife of the energy transition by many people. When you look at the different applications that people talk about for hydrogen, there are so many of them, and this graphic just shows a few of them. And clearly, given that currently less than 5% of global hydrogen production is actually from renewables or from fossil fuels with CCS, it is going to be very challenging to serve all of these end users with hydrogen in the foreseeable future. And we need to make decisions where it's going to be most valuable. I'm going to argue this morning that the heating sector is not one which should be high up on the list. There might be a role for hydrogen in some niches. There might be a role for hydrogen for storage, for example, or maybe in some hybrid systems. But I will show that it really is very challenging to use hydrogen at scale for decarbonizing heat. I will now talk a little bit about the basics of hydrogen, just very quickly, because I'm sure this has been covered perhaps already in previous discussions that you might have had. I mean, the two main forms of hydrogen that might be suitable for a net zero energy transition are either from CCS, where you sequester the carbon and you use a process called steam methane reforming. The problem with that process is that currently it isn't zero carbon. There's still some residual emissions, and that is partly because of upstream emissions where the gas is being extracted, and partly because the carbon capture process isn't 100% efficient and there's some leakage. The UK's Climate Change Committee believes that only 65 to 80% of carbon emissions could be reduced in that way, and clearly that is not compliant with net zero or climate neutrality goals. The second opportunity that we have is, of course, to use electricity, and ideally from renewables, to make hydrogen. And in theory, that can be zero carbon if the inputs are 100% renewables. Then you can get 100% zero carbon hydrogen. So those are the two main sources that are being discussed in this context. There's, of course, other ways of producing hydrogen that is more carbon intensive, but I'm not going to cover that this morning. The problem, though, of the electrolysis process of green hydrogen is really its inefficiency, and I will show that in a moment. This is a quote from a professor from Cambridge University who gave evidence earlier this year to the House of Commons in the UK, and this is a direct quote from him, and he said the Achilles heel of hydrogen is its inefficiency, and I think that is a really important point in all of this. It's not so much whether hydrogen can be zero carbon. It really is more about, is it realistic, and is it the most efficient and most cost-effective way of decarbonizing heating? And here's why these concerns about the inefficiency are so important. So I compare here the efficiency of using 1 unit of electricity from renewables via the hydrogen route at the bottom of this graphic to using it with a heat pump, for example. And you can see that there's a difference of about a factor of 4 to 6 between the two processes. In other words, you need about 4 to 6 times more low carbon electricity if you serve end use needs for heating purely with using hydrogen from renewables. So that is a well-established figure. There are many, many other studies that have come up with very similar results. Just to name a few, the Fraunhofer study that came out last year comes up with very similar numbers, but we also have seen more recent analysis from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. They have shown similar figures. So this is not really disputed. It's well acknowledged that it's multiple times more electricity you need. Depending on the system, it could be 4, it could be up to 6 times more electricity. Here's another study just to back that up. This was done by Frontier Economics in 2018, slightly different approach, but again, they show on the left-hand side a heat pump, and on the right-hand side, they show fuel cell heating or gas condensing boiler that's running on hydrogen, and you can see the efficiencies there, very similar to what I showed on the previous slide. So that's a key, I think, point of concern that drives a lot of the other factors in terms of costs, but also the renewables requirements. And this was already discussed, I think, by some of the previous speakers. And here's an illustration of what that means. So if we want to provide the same amount of heating going down a green hydrogen route compared to heat pumps again, you can just see here the amount of wind turbines required or the landmass required to do that. Of course, this is purely illustrative. You wouldn't use 100% offshore wind. There would be a more diverse supply system, but it demonstrates just the scale of the different capacities required. And that is indeed very, very challenging to achieve, which is one of the reasons why I believe it's going to be highly unlikely that we ever have hydrogen available at that scale, simply because the capacity on the production side in terms of renewable electricity generation is not going to be there fast enough to do that. So that's my first argument I wanted to put to you. And then the second is really about the costs. And this is a graphic that was published last month in the journal Nature Climate Change by the prestigious German Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. And what they have done is they have come up with what they call a merit order for hydrogen, and essentially looked at all the different end users that you can see here in the different colored columns. And they have ordered them according to where hydrogen makes the most sense. So when we look at the very right-hand side of this graphic, you can see things like air travel, for example, or some of the feedstocks used in chemical processes, where they believe hydrogen is a no-regret market and there's a lot of opportunity. On the left-hand side, it's exactly the opposite. That's where the researchers believe, because of the higher costs of actually reducing CO2, hydrogen is not a good option. Yeah, these are options, for example, such as traveling in cars using hydrogen, or using hydrogen for space heating in residential buildings. And this is mainly driven by the higher costs per ton of carbon that is being abated by using hydrogen. If you haven't seen this paper, I highly recommend it. It's a very thorough piece of work, a very objective piece of analysis that really looks at this in a very holistic way from a systems perspective. But the key message here really is that using hydrogen for heating is being identified as a low priority, and that there are better alternatives. Indicative here is direct electrification at the bottom, which is a lot cheaper than using hydrogen. If you find these kinds of graphics a bit too complicated, here's a very simple one that was produced just a few weeks ago by Mike Liebreich again, who I used the first slide from Mike, and he put together this hydrogen ladder of use cases using the energy label. Adrian Heel from Energy Cities came up with the idea, and then Michael Liebreich has refined that. The domestic heating is here right at the bottom of the chart. It's in F, domestic heating, for very similar reasons. It's the inefficiency and the high cost, and the presence of alternatives, which I will talk about in a moment, that are more competitive. So I think that's kind of the high level picture of where heating fits into the whole hydrogen discussion. I'm not saying hydrogen is something we should never be using. There's a lot of applications where it makes sense, but for heating, I do not see large-scale hydrogen playing a major role, mainly for cost reasons and for the constraints on the production side that I alluded to. And you could work out how many more times you have to increase the current renewable generation in Europe, and you would get to some very stunning figures that are very hard to obtain. And I want to talk a bit about the costs, and especially the costs to end users. What would it actually mean for a typical household and their energy bills? How much would they have to pay if they switched from current fossil fuel technologies to hydrogen or other alternatives that are low carbon? Oops. So this is a study that came out earlier this year by ICCT, and they've compared annual household heating costs of different technologies that potentially could reduce carbon emissions. You can see the costs here indicated in euros per year, and they are grouped according to how costly they are. And you can see that even if you use a very efficient way of using hydrogen for heating, you're still paying at least twice as much compared to a heat pump. This is an average across Europe. Of course, this will differ by member state. In some member states, electricity costs are lower than in others. So this is an average, and it will look slightly different for different countries. A very recent study that came out in the UK, again, and was just released last week, which I looked at in quite a bit of detail and have tweeted about. If you want to get a bit more of the detail, you can see it on my Twitter feed. Has done something very similar. And they find that based on a very detailed system cost study, that hydrogen will cost consumers about 73% more per year than heat pumps or district heating, in fact. And this was based on not just looking at the cost of the fuel, but actually looking at the cost of the entire system, for example, including the requirements to install additional renewable generation capacity, the requirements to maybe upgrade the gas grid, upgrade the electricity grid. And these are the costs that the researchers believe will be passed on to end users. The message here is very clear, that the hydrogen route is the most expensive of the three scenarios they compared, which is district heating, heat pumps, and hydrogen from green electricity. So the evidence is pretty clear, at least the independent evidence. Of course, you will find that there are studies that have been commissioned by industry representatives that paint a different picture. They often rely heavily on blue hydrogen, and they indicate that that could be a cheaper way forward. But none of the independent studies I have seen that hasn't been funded by vested interest groups comes to that conclusion, which is quite telling. This is a study that was done by University College London and was funded by a research fund by the UK government. So what are the credible pathways for heat decarbonisation if hydrogen is not an option, at least at scale? Just briefly, I wanted to point to some of the solutions and not just criticize hydrogen, but actually outline some of the solutions going forward. I think a very good starting point, it's actually the recent IEA report that came out in early June, I think it was, or late May, on net zero 2050. And that's a slide, sorry. And they looked at decarbonisation in all of the different sectors to meet very ambitious net zero goals. And what they found is that the two main drivers really that would lead to decarbonisation in their scenarios are two things. One is building renovation and reducing energy demand in existing buildings, but also making sure new buildings are of a very high standard when it comes to energy efficiency. So that's a very important element in all of this that is often overlooked, but is very, very important. And then secondly, and this is on the right-hand side of this graphic, they look at the fuel sources used, and you can see in blue the share of heat pumps, which is about 55% of final demand for heating that's being provided. You can see that another very important source is solar thermal and district heating. Hydrogen is in there, but it's barely visible. It's almost not visible at all, and it's a very small share of the total. A lot of that will potentially be used in specific localities where there's already hydrogen available for industrial processes, or as a complement in hybrid systems. For example, in CHP plants using hydrogen connected to district heating, or maybe even in individual installations in some cases, where hydrogen is used to complement heat pumps during very cold periods in the year. In the EU, we have a very similar picture. This is data from a whole range of scenarios that the Joint Research Centre of the European Commission put together last year. And you can see the different fuels again listed here, and hydrogen is in light blue. And you can see it only in one scenario, actually showing in the graphic, and that's the Ecovision scenario. But even there, it's a very small share. This is for 2030. If you looked at 2050, it would be somewhat bigger, but it's still a very, very small. And basically most studies that have modeled significant reductions in emissions have not identified hydrogen as the cheapest option, and have certainly not attributed a large share of the emission savings to it. And of course, new studies come out all the time, and we keep an eye on that. But so far, the evidence is pretty compelling and shows that this holds. And even if costs are falling, then you also have reductions of electricity costs that feed through for the other technologies. which, that could be the main, again, cost driver of hydrogen is lower electricity costs, but then you have the same happening to technologies using electricity, such as heat pumps or when it's used in district heating. So what are my conclusions based on looking at all of this? The first conclusion is that hydrogen is a very valuable premium fuel and has multiple high use applications, as I've indicated on my first slide. And that it makes a lot of sense to use it in some areas, but certainly not in all of them. The second conclusion is that there are more cost-effective alternatives, as studies have indicated. So we do not need to rely on hydrogen. There are other ways of doing it that are cheaper and much more efficient. And then finally, electrification and energy efficiency can already decarbonize heating today with immediate benefits. So we don't need to wait for new technology to come along. We actually have already something that we can deploy, and we need to deploy it fast because we only have a few years left to get this done. Thank you for listening. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Jan. As the time is, as we are a little bit behind time, I will firstly give the floor to my colleague Rory Forster to talk about the decarbonization efforts in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Roddy. And yeah, I will say I'm also in the UK, but I think not quite as sunny as I think Jan was having it down in Oxford. Right, well, I will just get started. If everyone can see that okay, can we? Yeah, fantastic. So, hi everyone, I'm just going to quickly talk about the gas policy successes in the Netherlands in regards to phasing out. Since I don't have much time, I'll just launch straight in. So at the national level, the Dutch government has set a target of total gas phase out by 2050 and has set by 2030 that it will phase out gas completely from 1.5 million out of a total 7 million residential homes by 2030, and will be ending extraction of gas from the Groningen gas field 8 years earlier than was previously expected. That will be ending in 2022, which will ultimately result in a reduction of approximately 40 billion cubic meters of gas. So yes, in terms of key policies produced by the government, so the government's stipulated different policies to be passed that will affect the regional and local as well as the long-term national level targets that we've just talked about. So I'll go on to the regional level one, which is the heat transition vision. So the national government required that each regional authority will produce a strategy that reduces reliance on fossil gas heating, which will be referred to as regional energy strategies, and ultimately will guide the national government's heat transition vision overall. The heat transition vision is expected to be completed by the end of 2021, at which point the government will produce a national strategy of completely phasing out gas. The strategies focus on key principles laid out by the national government, which is that all strategies must follow the values of sustainability and collaboration. So yes, it will be developed incredibly closely with key stakeholders and general public. And one regional area that has already produced its strategy is the Utrecht Metropolitan Authority, which published its regional energy strategy, developing 4 approaches to phasing out gas in the Utrecht region through consultation with a diverse range of industry, academic and public representatives. So it developed 4 approaches, developed these 4 strategies and then passed them on to the general public and community leaders through open forums, and presented each approach in the context of phasing out gas from the 22,000 homes that make up the area. This is used, the forums were used to provide a breakdown of each approach's advantages and disadvantages, costs and effects, and timelines, and the public were then asked to participate in ranking each of these approaches through the distribution of 100 points between the four. So when this was done, it maximized engagement from all age groups, neighborhoods, and created an incredibly diverse forum with people of all backgrounds and all sorts of represented interests in the forum, and has in turn successfully shaped Utrech's renewable energy strategy and has set a template for the not only the heat transition vision, but for other regional authorities looking to carry out the same process. So, and then at the local level, we have the Natural Gas-Free Neighbourhoods Programme, which is being run as a much more specialised, much more localised, down to individual neighbourhoods. And that's currently just entered its second trial round, and it's referred to as the PAW initiative. So it's a separate scheme which allows local authorities to apply for funding for their produced fossil gas phase out strategies. And that's been successfully trialed in 26 neighborhoods and municipal regions. And the second round will expand that to a further 19 local authorities and provide over 100 million euros of funding. So this strategy has been trialed in Amsterdam so far and was so successful with its funding of gas phasing out strategies that Amsterdam has declared that it will be completely carbon neutral gas phased out heating by 2040. So yes, that's just a quick run through, very quick run through of those policies. And the Dutch model provides a lot. It gives a lot to be learned for the Bulgarian approach to decarbonisation and phasing out of gas. So what can Bulgaria learn from the success of the Dutch pathway to decarbonisation? Well, first and foremost, the government should take steps to encourage multi-level engagement from the public side. In each policy that the Dutch government has produced for phasing out gas, diverse public engagement has been central to the development of decarbonisation plans. Opening forums to businesses, individuals, and community organisations and leaders has it's allowed the local authorities and regional authorities to develop highly effective localized gas plans that have worked for everyone so far, or will work for everyone. Secondly, these strong specialized decarbonisation strategies at the local and regional level need to be in place for an effective gas phase out at the national level. And by empowering local authorities to be autonomous in the phasing out of gas, the Bulgarian government can essentially see decarbonisation plans effectively tailored towards specific needs of smaller communities, and as seen in the case of the Netherlands, major cities. So then secondly, the themes of what a Bulgarian gas phase out should look like is also highly based on the Netherlands approach. So first and foremost, transparency at every step of the planning stage and strategy development stage is paramount, fostering trust between the public and government bodies. So in the Netherlands, under the PAW initiative and the heat transition vision, thorough spending breakdowns were provided to the public for every subsidy that was granted, and these were given for public review, and is essentially ensured that money is being spent where the public wants it to be spent, and ensures that a strong working relationship can be fostered between the public and local authorities for a strong green transition. Secondly, inclusivity has to be at the core of the gas phase out strategies in Bulgaria. Again, the Dutch model of gas phase out saw local authorities working with an incredibly diverse range of stakeholders on the public side to develop its strategies, and has set the stage for an incredibly efficient and effective phasing out of gas in the Netherlands. This has to be applied in Bulgaria so that all communities, especially those in isolated rural communities, are not being left behind by the authorities when they step down the path of a green transition. And lastly, as I'm sure we'll all agree, ambition is absolutely necessary for a successful gas phase out to take place. So as Zamiata, we generally agree that the Bulgarian government needs to be more ambitious in phasing out fossil gas from heating and making its steps towards clean heating across the country. And looking at the policies published under the Dutch model, we can see just how effective this is when the government ambition is the one fostering the successful green transition and working with the public. I will stop there just so that we can move back on time with the strategy, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Rory. Now I will open up the Q&A session and start with my question for Johannes. As you know, yesterday we were discussing the transformation of district heating, using fully renewable energy. And we heard that Vienna is also implementing some modern solutions like heat pumps, power to heat from wind. And I would ask you to elaborate more on that. What are the plans of Vienna?
Thanks for the question. We are engaged in some of the discussions. As I said, in Vienna, the plan is now under discussion, or it's in elaboration now. What we hear from Vienna officials is that it will be more or less a mix between district heating and heat pumps, and maybe some other energy sources, but district heating will play a major role in decarbonization of the Vienna heating system. And of course, also the district heating system has to be decarbonized. For all over Austria, we would have like less than half of energy coming from renewable energy sources, and the rest is mainly gas. What we see, there already exist in some scenarios how Vienna can manage to do that. So these are like based more on energy models. And what we see on the one hand, there would be an increase of use of heat pumps also for the district heating system. So we have already some of like really big heat pumps in place in Vienna that are installed now. On the other hand, we see increasing use of solar thermal that can be used as well. You mentioned already power to heat, where they use excess wind energy. What is also interesting, what is usually less under discussion, is that Vienna, for instance, is in a region where we can use geothermal sources. We don't use them at all at the moment. So it depends a bit on whether you have the right drilling and a bit luck in drilling, I have to say as well, because there was one attempt in the past, like some years ago. This was not successful, but from the geothermal region, we know that there is big potential, and this is also one of the crucial parts that will be in Vienna. The interesting thing is we have a lot of other district heating systems in Austria that have to be decarbonized as well. If I go away a bit from Vienna, and what we saw is interestingly that usually then we have energy corporations, they have their gas CHP plants, or even until last year we had even coal CHP plants. So, and then this results in the public authorities don't think about what could we do, because we have this energy corporation, we have the contracts, the problem is solved for them. So, and this, we had one city, it's Graz, it's like the second largest city in Austria. What was very interesting is then they had a conflict with the energy provider and a conflict over the contracts. And then they started to think about what can we do. And now they found so many solutions. They found we have industry there. We can use waste heat from them just cheap. Yeah, we have solar thermal potential. We can retrofit the buildings. We can use so many sources, and I think in every region you will find a lot of renewable solutions that maybe not be similar to other regions completely, but in general, yeah, this is underway, and it's blocked a lot by energy corporations that still have their power plants in place and want to have them under contract. If that would be like not the case, we would have much more rapid decarbonization of district heatings, I guess, in Austria and many other places as well.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Yes, when we are talking about solutions, it's always a mix of those. Okay, let's check the questions from the chat. The first one is, what is the risk of using the renewable energy sources? The resources needed to produce so much new solar panels, for example, are also exhaustible. And on this, I'll give the floor to my colleague Gennady Kundarev, and then some of our other speakers if they want to add something.
Thank you, Radi. Yes, indeed. Also, all the other colleagues are very welcome to chip in with opinion. But basically, most of the renewable energy sources and the technologies that they're currently on a mass production are actually quite recyclable. In the case of solar panels, we are talking already about rates that stretch beyond 80% for the most used crystalline solar modules. The thin film amorphous one that also had quite a lot of criticism throughout the years, but they have also their special niche, are actually recyclable to beyond 95%. And there have been a couple of projects already under the European research programs, the Horizon 2020 and previously the framework programs, checking also on the recyclability, proving that most of those actually can achieve rates beyond 99%. So they're actually quite fit for the principles of circular economy. Which being said, of course, doesn't mean that we shouldn't stay vigilant and consider how we can redesign all the processes and aim for the highest percent possible. Jan, please.
Thanks. No, just to add to that, I mean, I think the question is an important one, because sometimes in this discussion, I hear people say we will have an abundance of renewables and it will be, it will be free essentially, and we won't have any impact at all on the environment. And I think we need to be careful with that argument, because from my perspective, it makes no sense to waste valuable renewables. We still have a very small share globally when we look at the share of renewables, that it is very, very, very small, and it needs to grow fast. But if we waste renewables and if we're not careful in how we use it, I think we're going to take longer to actually meet the full penetration of renewables. It's going to be more expensive as well, and it's not necessary. So I think we need to pay close attention to the resource requirements, and especially for hydrogen, as I said before, you would need significantly more renewables. So I think there's also a practical question: can we actually build as many renewables as quickly as needed? And what's the impact on the environment? I think we need to be also engaging, perhaps with the community, the conservation community around the impacts on the oceans, the impacts on land use, and ideally we minimize that impact. There will be some impact, but I have sympathy for the question. But I also agree with Gennady that many of these issues can be addressed, but we got to be quite careful how we make most efficient use of renewables.
Yes, but totally the trend for improving is definitely there, and the last decade has proven that there have been a lot of advancing on the topic of recycling, not only of the renewable energy technologies, but also of the batteries that was so much of a concern just a decade ago. I think that generally it's developing in the right direction. The industry is actually aiming to produce those technologies, making them, under the rule, being dirt cheap, because they need to be very competitive. And this combined with with the concepts of circular economy is definitely proving that they're way lesser evil, because they cannot be perfect compared to any of the other solutions that we have at the moment. Throughout the years, we've done so many reports on, for example, what's been left over after the coal industry in Bulgaria. We are talking about over a ton of mercury that is being emitted in the environment every single year by the Bulgarian power plants, burning 30 million tons of low quality lignite in the country, have left behind over 19,000. It was the last time we tried to calculate and sum it up, of ash ponds around. So it is a significant impact, and it's anyway going to end up at some point. So we'll still have to be back to the solutions that we are trying to develop and accelerate at the moment.
Thank you, Gennady. I will give the floor again to Jan to comment very shortly on the question by Vail Hlebarov from the Clean Air team in Zazimiata, who is saying that Bulgaria is currently investing heavily in pellet stoves and boilers to address its clean air problem. We are talking about more than 400,000 households, some of which poor, in need to change their heating appliances. Taking into account health and climate challenges, is there another probably better path to heating these households for clean air and also to meet the climate goals?
I mean, that's such a controversial topic, the whole issue of bioenergy use in general, and it's a complicated discussion. We actually just yesterday published a piece on Euract on the Renewable Energy Directive, which currently has indicative heating targets for renewables, and 81% of those targets were being met by mainly burning biomass, that is going to continue as the Commission thinks until 2030, when it's still going to be 2/3. So most of the current renewable heat target, not just in Bulgaria, but also in other countries in Europe, are being met by burning biomass. And in many cases, that is unsustainable biomass with actually very little emission effect. So I think we need to be very careful with how we use bioenergy. They are sustainable forms of it, but they are also unsustainable forms of bioenergy. And I think the question implies that there are air quality implications of burning biomass, and that clearly is the case. And it is a problematic technology from that perspective. It would probably play some role, but all the studies again that have looked at a systems perspective do not identify bioenergy as providing a large share of end-use heating because there's a resource constraint, and I think also there are some really quite significant air quality implications. So I agree with, I think, the question that has been asked, that we need to be careful and look at some of the alternatives that are better for clean air and have a lower carbon footprint than biomass.
Thank you very much, Jan. And a few more remarks from Gennady.
Indeed, on the topic of biomass, I think that electrification in the heating is a very clear direction. This is considered a solution starting from households even to large scale utilities like district heating networks at the moment. And I think that this is where we're going at ultimately. It will be very important here to consider also the energy heat storage applications. And I just want to lift the curtain a little bit to the Tomorrow Business panel, when we'll try to provoke the debate, actually presenting one technology coming from the UK, and it's turning the good old big water tank, the boilers here that are so popular in our region, into a smart device, which is through a UK company has now this application called Mixergy. And we would like really to promote the debate showing this one tomorrow. But I really want to thank all the speakers for pointing out and stressing out so well the topic of decarbonization of heating, because really the policies considering clean air and decarbonization should not be in a clash between each other. There should be an integrity between the policies. And I thank you very much for this comprehensive and eye-opening panel that was organized today.
Thank you very much on my side also to our very knowledgeable speakers today. And now I would like to announce a very short 5 minutes break for a short coffee before we start with our next panel on the renovation wave and the recovery plans. See you all in 5 minutes.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Hello again, and welcome to the second panel of the third day of our conference. Now we will talk about the renovation wave and how 3 countries are preparing themselves for this challenge. We will discuss briefly in the presentations and then in the panel session how these countries have what these countries have put in their recovery and resilience plans in the field of renovation of buildings, addressing energy poverty, and integrating more renewable energy sources. First, we will hear about the situation in Romania, where Anca from the Babeș University will tell us more. Anca, you have the floor and you can share your screen as well.
Hello to everybody, and thank you for inviting me to speak. Well, for accepting to cooperate on this panel to approach this topic from a very interesting and I think innovative perspective. We would like to look into how national resilience plans, which is basically the most concrete instrument at hand for member states. Because why am I calling it at hand? Because it entails strategies, well, as I said, instruments, it involves money, it involves vision, how member states are planning to tackle energy poverty through this instrument. And I will now share my screen for my presentation. My name is Anca Sinia, and I'm a researcher with the Babeș University and the associated think tank, Center for the Study of Democracy. We've been involved for several years now in energy poverty research. And I would like to tap into this and to answer this question. But the first thing that I would like to point to is to present a number of statistics of energy poverty generally in Romania, just to familiarize ourselves with the situation at hand. So there are various instruments to measure energy poverty in a country as they are being used in academic work, but also in institutional work of the European Union. Academically speaking, there are basically 3 indices to measure energy poverty. According to the first one, 2M, which measures the household energy expenditure, so the households that have energy expenditure which is higher than the double the national average is 10%. So Romania is 10%, according 10% of the Romanian households are under energy poverty according to this index. To this can be added, and to any other index can be added, a very interesting index which measures hidden energy poverty. So that means households that are consuming energy much below what national average is. And according to that index, we have 11.7, so almost 12% of our population, of our households actually, it's more population, of those households that are hidden energy poor. Households that fall under the threshold of poverty after paying their energy bills are 13%, which points out basically the maybe the high costs, too high costs, so the high prices with respect to their income.
Excuse me, Anca, could you switch to full screen as we can't?
Oh, I'm sorry. Just a second. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, yes.
Perfect.
Thank you. And according to the 10%, so households spend more than 10% of their income on energy. And so that's an accentuation of the previous, let's say, index. We have a pretty high number, 45.3%. Now, the European Commission measures energy poverty bit of a with other basically indexes or indicators that are lesser of the income expenditure ratio, and is more of is taking into how many households pay their utilities on time. And we have 14.4 households in Romania that are late on their payments, and 9.6% of households that perceive their houses or their living spaces as being too cold. Okay, now we have at our institutions, we've tried to put together various numbers that explain specificities of Romanian energy poverty, including quality of household, including connection or disconnection, and so on and so forth. And our percentage is 25% of the population. And now I'm going to tap into various specificities of energy poverty in Romania. And in parallel, I'm going to touch upon how the National Resilience Plan is planning to approach this issue. Now, from the outstart, if you access this document and try to find the concept of energy poverty, it will come up too little, once or twice. And it's been one of the critiques of the European Commission that the Resilience Plan proposed by Romania does not treat energy poverty in a direct way, does not. So what we're trying to do is to look into the instruments that might be useful, or instruments that are not enough in terms of energy poverty. Now, one of the specific issues in Romania are multi-family buildings, which are basically panel buildings. Most of them are, from socialist era panel buildings, so they entail very specific characteristics of energy poverty. They're 33% of our housing facility, and they consume 31% of the final energy. Now, according to some of the calculations that are based on survey data, in order for these households to heat up to a 21 degrees Celsius that is regulated, the standard regulated nationally, they might consume up to 655 kilowatt hour per square meter per year. So, and just to compare, so this is a need, right? So it's a need-based consumption, but real consumption-based statistics at European level, the European mean is 180, okay? Single-family buildings are another problem, okay? They might consume up to 900 kilowatt hour square meter per annum to heat up to 21 degrees. Now this depends, both of these consumption depend on their location, depend on their building material, and so on and so forth, and the fuel that they use, okay? Most of the single family buildings, the single-family buildings make up 58% of our building facilities, and they consume around 50% of the final energy consumption, final energy. Whereas multi-family buildings are an issue in the urban, single-family buildings are, the rule in the rural area. And the rural area, we have a specific problem with low investment capacity, right, because of reduced incomes, okay, and increasing and degrading, low quality and degrading quality of these households. Now, what does the National Resilience Plan do? It prioritizes multifamily buildings, okay, despite of them being fewer and maybe, being a problem in terms of energy poverty, but being less of a problem. Okay, they're a big problem, but lesser of a big problem, we would like to say. And the plan is to renovate 100% of them with at least 30% renovation by 2026. Whereas for single family buildings, there are no precise strategies. They may be targeted through already existing programs which aim for renewable technology installation and some installation works. But these programs, which are proposed to be implemented further on, are at currently inoperative due to the lack of funding or due to the low administrative capacity. There are no specific targets with regards to how many households, single family households, will be renovated until when. They only mentioned that 77% of the residential buildings in general will be targeted by 2015. So that is one of the issues that we spotted so far. Okay, some other issues that, so the rural-urban approach, some other issues that, let's say, stand out in energy poverty in the rural and urban approach is, so the targeting issue, okay? The National Resilience Plan does very well to focus on targeting, the need for targeting, right? And they target the low performing buildings. But we have a problem here, right, in the rural. And one problem is that in the rural area, we have pockets of energy poverty. In the urban area, we have pockets of energy poverty. And these are mainly the marginalized communities, which have not been directly targeted by the National Resilience Plans. But generally speaking, beyond this pocketed energy poverty, we have structural energy poverty, and which is the rule. That means that most of the energy poor in the cities are not crowded together in pockets, and this has been established in research projects that we have performed. So they're not concentrated, but they're spread all over the city. That means that applying blanket-based interventions is not enough. It is important to develop measures that would support energy poor families in particular and additionally, and these are not proposed, okay? As I said previously, the rural area with its many issues is being marginally addressed through, let's say, connected policies. Okay. Another problem that is both in the urban and in the rural is the high property ratio, which makes many of the interventions difficult. So 94.7% of the population have their own households, which makes policies, quite ineffective at times. Now, one of the, let's say, positive sides of the National Resilience Plan is that it plans to reform these policies. But even these reforms should be discussed in terms of how do we break through this high property ratio, let's say, wall that renders some of the previous, let's say, policies quite ineffective. Another issue regards the access to diversified sources of energy, and that will go into, let's say, the final energy mix for households here. And just to point out a few issues and a few resolutions proposed by the National Resilience Plan. Now, most of the households in Romania heat up with gas. Okay, but this is quite limited. Okay, this is quite limited, and even though 42% of the households heat up with gas, this is strictly limited to the high density urban and suburban localities. Most of the rural areas, they do not have access to gas or to any other source of heating. 80% of households in the rural area heat up with wood, and 12% in addition in the urban area, which is a problem. The wood that they use is most of the time low quality. The systems that they use to burn is low quality, so outputs in the atmosphere are high, costs are also high because there is no market for wood, and prices tend to variate. At some points in the year, they go get even higher than gas or any other sources, even electricity, as we have calculated. Now, some of the measures that the National Resilience Plan, let's say, puts out is regards to development of gas pipes. Okay, and these gas pipes that they promote are currently for gas and with a technological capacity to transport also other forms of gas of the future, sometimes in the future when they become technologically available. But these are, so the resilience plan plans out 400 kilometers of such pipes to one region, basically a pilot project. But we regard this as too little and too few. Why? Especially because the poor households or the households that have limited access to diversified sources of energy are spread all around Romania. And a more, let's say, targeted and more effective policy that they should be looking into, the decision makers should be looking into, is maybe if spreading out this plan to the country, around the country, would be a better solution. Actually, 900 administrative units in Romania are within 10 kilometers from existing networks, and maybe just calculating the expenses to extend these networks and update them wouldn't be more effective and wouldn't touch more households. Another resource is district heating. District heating is basically a system that has been, let's say, here, especially due to the communist developments, socialist developments in the past. However, investment in the system has been low. This is a reason why they have a low efficiency rate, and maybe Bucharest is an example for low efficiency and breakdowns and thousands of households being left out in the cold in the middle of winter. Okay, this is why the disconnection rate is quite high. And even though around the country, some of the district heating companies have tried to, let's say, invest, improve the technology, reduce costs, reduce inefficiencies, the acceptance rate is quite low. Well, but what the National Resilience Plan is doing to counter that is they allocate funding for district heating connections. So as part of the renovation, works that will be funded, connecting to district heating might also be funded in the future. However, there is no real system improvement plan which is available, and there's also no public acceptance strategies, which is also important that is available. Okay, another important resource is electricity. Electricity is quite well spread, but for lighting, for heating, it is marginal used because it's expensive. Just 1% of the population uses electricity to heat, and these are either the mostly the extreme poor or the ones that are better off and afford electric technology. Okay, with regards to the transition from wood to, let's say, cleaner technologies, the National Resilience Plan is quite determined to do this. But the means are, let's say, quite discreet. Targeted funds for this type of transition are allocated especially to enterprises and not to households. Some of the funds are integrated in the single-family households renovation strategies, and which are the funds that are quite limited and little functional at the moment. Now, with regard to low-cost measures, practice and let's say literature has proved the fact, is very supportive of the fact that low-cost measure can bring us a long way. Right. So far, there has been little investment in low-cost measures in Romania. But one of the things that is quite impressive in the National Resilience Plan is that they are expanding the types of household works that should be funded through the National Resilience Plan, including indoor repairs, light bulbs, etc. But mainly multifamily buildings are targeted. Legislation to reduce bureaucracy and speed up interventions in households are another very, let's say, optimistic change, but they're also mainly dedicated to multifamily buildings. My last, let's say, remark. Yes, my last remark.
Should we go to the last remarks? Thanks.
Yes. One important thing is the training of auditors. That has so far not focused on energy poverty. Now, the current plan is aiming to increase training of auditors, including to perform fast-track audits, which is quite laudable, and also to improve the capacity of rural areas and other local entities to implement these auditing, let's say, use these auditing facilities. However, no energy poverty training is mentioned, and this is very important. Thank you so much for your attention. Yes.
Thank you, Anka. Really interesting presentation. Now let's hear about the situation in Hungary from Nora Feldmar from Habitat for Humanity Hungary. And are they having more ambitious recovery plan than the Bulgarian one, which is still under preparation? And we hope to see a final version at the end of this month from the current caretaker government. Nora, you have the floor.
Thank you. Hi, do you hear me? Great.
Yes.
I'm seeing this. Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, I was pressing number. And now you see my screen, hopefully. Yes, great.
Yes, everything's fine.
Okay, so yes, hi, I'm Nora Feldmar from Habitat for Humanity Hungary, and I will talk about also the renovation and energy poverty aspects of the recovery plan. So Habitat works with the problem of housing, and we believe that access is needed for everyone to affordable and decent housing, which can only happen if the problem of energy poverty is tackled seriously. And therefore, this work lies in the intersection of energy and social policies. And our work on one hand is very practical in the field. We work with actual renovations, and on the other hand, we advocate for appropriate policy instruments. And therefore, we believe the recovery facility would have provided an excellent opportunity to roll out large-scale, innovative, and multidisciplinary programs to tackle this problem. So I will also give a little bit of background into the energy poverty situation in Hungary and the priorities that we believe should be tackled, and then of course go on to our recovery plan and how that relates to the renovation rate. So these are the three priorities we believe are crucial. So a large-scale renovation of the worst performing buildings which reach low-income households. The second one is sustainable and affordable heating for households who don't have access to gas or district heating networks. And the third one, very importantly, is the expansion and renovation of the social housing stock. So just a little overview on the housing stock. 2/3 are single unit dwellings, i.e. family houses. Over 80% of the housing stock was built before 1990, therefore have a very high energy demand. Actually, we have one of the poorest energy efficient housing stock in the EU. To reach the renovation wave targets, proportional to the Hungarian stock, we would need 100 to 130,000 dwellings renovated with significant energy renovations, deep renovations per year. Just a special issue I would like to draw attention. In Hungary, the adobe houses or mud brick houses are still very prevalent. So about 600,000 are such buildings of the about 4 million dwellings that we have. And these buildings are the ones that have the highest energy demand, are in the worst condition, and also is the type of buildings which have the highest low-income households living in them. And for these reasons, they need special renovation. They have special renovation requirements, also in a physical sense that, for example, a lot of the modern materials are not compatible with these houses. So special programs would be welcome to tackle this. The second one, in terms of heating, as in other countries in the region, solid fuel heating is very widespread. And again, this is especially typical for low-income households. In general, 30–40% of the population uses solid fuels, but with the lowest income quintile, this is above 60%. In terms of social housing, we have a very low housing stock of less than 3%, which has gradually been decreasing even in the past few years. This is compared to an EU average of about 8%. Just a sort of background of existing subsidies and the approach of the government to subsidies. We have consistently seen that subsidies are going towards middle and upper middle class households, and the housing policies as such are part of the so-called family policies with a clear goal to motivate larger families. So some of the subsidies are actually sort of go up with the number of children a family has, or even children they are planning to have. Some example of this is the utility price cut, which has been present since 2013, which artificially lowered the prices of household energy. And this meant that the larger savings are with the larger consumers, i.e. higher income households, and also they fail to reach families who rely on solid fuels, the price of which have been steeply going up. We currently have 2 large renovation programs, which are funded from the national budget. They all tend to need pre-financing, so you only receive the funding once the renovation is completed. They have very high, complicated bureaucratic processes, and these are managed by the banks. And there is no energy efficiency requirement, so these funds the households can spend on any form of renovation they choose. Of course, the COVID situation has impacted the lower income groups much more severely, and Hungary had one of the lowest, or if not the lowest, emergency economic aids in the EU. So we can say there are no currently available renovation subsidies for low-income households. And so far, what we see planned in the operation programs funded by the cohesion funds, there is also no specific renovation component there. So going to the recovery and resilience plan of Hungary, there are two components which are relevant for our issue. The first one is a so-called catching up municipalities, or sometimes referred to as emerging settlements. This covers the 3% of the budget, and it has social and renewable energy investments and reforms. It is targeted at the 300 most disadvantaged communities in two regions, two counties of two regions of the country, and is coordinated and implemented largely by the Maltese Charity Service. The other one is the energy green transition component, which has a budget of 10% of the budget, only 6% of the budget directly targeted at households. So we can say there's 9% of the budget related to housing. Vast majority of this is going to heating, electrification, and there is no specific renovation component, unfortunately. So about the more social component, the one managed by the Maltese Charity, it has three components. The first one is the construction and renovation of social housing and improvement of housing conditions. The goal here is to implement basic improvements on 200, 500 houses. These are mainly ones which even lack running water. So they will be these basic improvements, also things such as leaking roofs. However, no major renovation, especially no energy renovation. The other target is 600 newly built social housing units, which will be owned and managed by also the Maltese Charity Service. Therefore, it will not be public housing as such, and it is an extremely low number compared to even the existing and very low number of housing stock, social housing stock that we have. So the second relevant element of this component is the social solar power plants, where the goal is to have about 27 megawatts capacity of solar panels next to these settlements. We estimate this will be in about 50, 55 settlements, as the exact number is not included in the plan. However, there is currently one pilot project that we see, which is implemented by the Maltese in partnership with E.ON. And the idea is that from the income generated by the solar panels, families who have young children can have one room heated by a new electric heater, which is connected to a prepaid meter, which is topped up every heating season by about 350 euros each season. So basically, it's a heating subsidy in the form of a credit on these prepaid meters. Again, these solar plants will be owned by the Maltese Charity, so it's not really a form of community energy, let's say, and you can say it's quite an inefficient solution, as these houses have an extremely high energy demand, and only one room will be heated in such a way. The problem in general with this component is that it's basically supporting a parallel institutional system. This program has been launched in 2019, so this sort of a government program is being managed by the Maltese Charity, and the recovery plan is sort of boosting this program. And as we saw, it only tackles a few selected issues and selected settlements. In the energy and green transition component, the main component is the electrification of residential heating systems in combination with solar power systems. Here, this program is set to target energy poor households. However, here they define this as any household whose income is below the national average, and the goal is to substitute, to improve 12,000 households outdated energy system to renewable energy, and this is a 100% non-refundable fund. This can include the replacement of the windows for specifically plastic plastic windows. And this is the only place where we see the renovation wave being mentioned in the plan. So it's basically the window replacement, window and door replacement of 10,000 households is all that is contributing to the renovation wave. Again, this is really not an efficient solution as it's not coupled with energy renovation. So to heat up these houses with energies is questionably quite inefficient. Also, a lot of green NGOs have voiced the problem that during the winter, the energy demand, the electricity demand will go up, which when the solar panels are actually not producing much, so it will actually drive up fossil fuel and nuclear-based energy demand. And again, a huge problem is that this subsidy can only go to houses whose condition is sufficient for receiving these interventions. So excluding a lot of households who have a poor housing condition. And referring back to the Adobe mud brick house problem, we could say that probably the plastic windows are again not really compatible. So it's questionable that they probably will be disqualified altogether. So to sum up, these two components did touch on all the three priorities that we have identified. However, to a very, very small extent, they are very far from the renovation target of 120,000 renovations per year. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of questions on how many actual energy poor households can benefit from any of these. Of course, we have a number of specific recommendations. I will not go into these as I think until these issues, the issue of renovation in general and specifically energy poverty is taken seriously. Unfortunately, these sort of recommendations stay quite far from reality. And that was my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nora. Before I give the floor to Dragomir from NEffect to give you more details about the situation in Bulgaria, I would like to say a few words on the Bulgarian recovery plan. What we have seen in the versions so far, 3, we can't see much ambition in the renovation efforts. We are really very far from the ambition level of the renovation wave. And the actual rate to be in line with the Paris Agreement, not just doubling the annual renovation rate, but even tripling and quadrupling. In the Bulgarian plan, there are announced plans for some reforms, like the one-stop shop, developing a definition for energy poverty, and also introducing a mechanism for financing renewables and energy efficiency measures through the energy bill. So far, the plans are really vague. There are only deadlines and the concrete details will be developed in working groups afterwards, for which we hope very much the general public and the NGO sector to be also involved to participate. Still, the two main programs for renovation of buildings, in our opinion, not only the level of ambition is the problem, although it's one of the main problems. We nominated this program within the EU Cash Awards, where the EU citizens awarded the Bulgarian program for being the winner in the category for closing the eyes towards the potential for energy savings in the residential sector. I will put in the chat links to the other problems within this program. And one last sentence about a new good direction we saw in the plan. It's a program for a single renewables measures for both single family and multi-family buildings, introducing solar PV and solar thermal collectors. This program was also nominated in the EU Cash Awards and won the first prize for supporting energy communities. And again, you will find more information in the chat in a while. But now, giving the floor to Dragomir Tsanev. Drago.
Thank you, Radi. Thanks a lot for, first of all, for the invitation, and now for the intervention that I guess makes my job a little bit easier after such a detailed description of the situation in Bulgaria. So my name is Dragomir Tsanev. I represent Center for Energy Efficiency and Effects. And you might easily guess by that my main message would be that actually building renovation is the sustainable solution to the issue of energy poverty. Unfortunately, in Bulgaria, it's a historical fact that there is a contradiction between the policies regarding energy efficiency in general and environmental protection. Also in consideration in relation to energy poverty issues. At one hand, we have very intensive heat subsidies, or as we call them, wood and coal subsidies for vulnerable households. On the other hand, we are trying to mitigate the issue with air quality, and you know the Bulgarian cities are the cities in Europe with the worst air quality. And at last, or in the beginning, I don't know, we have that notorious building renovation program that is giving 100% public grant for renovation of private residential buildings without having any energy poverty or environmental criteria that have to be followed in that. So basically, that's the challenge that we have. And if we could solve that puzzle, which mind you bears lots of political implications, then we might get on the right track. And at the same time, the recovery and resilience mechanisms actually gives us a unique opportunity to get back on the right track. But the point is that we still seem unable to manage to catch that opportunity and introduce sustainable solution in the renovation in the building sector. And as Radi also mentioned, actually we are looking at 3 draft versions of the recovery and resilience plan made by the previous government. And then I'm sure that someone at the moment at the Council of Ministers is looking at us and laughing out loud because they're working on the 4th version and there might be completely different things. So every word I'm saying now might be obsolete at the same time. So basically we're talking about things that are probably not going to take shape as they were supposed to do. And we'll be presuming or forecasting some further development based on some kind of background information that we receive one way or another. So please excuse me if what I present is not 100% the reality that will be there in a couple of months, but that's the situation that we're in. And that's also respect to another policy issue that we have in Bulgaria, and that's transparency in decision making. But anyway, that's another point of view. I'm moving to the basics. And actually what we can do is at that moment of time is go back to basics. And by the way, listening to the seminar the previous hours, actually both Jan and Rory nailed the basics. So the basics are renovation, electrification, and multi-level governance moving to the communities because they give us the power and the contacts that they have the trust of the citizens. And this is where change happens. It doesn't happen in the government. It happens at the local level, at the change of the citizens' behavior. So we all know Bulgaria and our region in general is at the bottom of European rankings on energy poverty. And what we tend to forget, by the way, is that that's very much related to the poor condition of the building stock that we inherited and failed to maintain from previous ages. What we have now in Bulgaria, the one program that is shaping the attitude, political and public, to energy efficiency and presuming solutions related to energy poverty at the same time. And the program is giving, as I mentioned before, 100% public grant for renovation of multi-family buildings. And with that, with that clear intention, in the past 5 years, we succeeded to renovate 4% of the multi-family buildings that are eligible or in need of renovation. So basically 96% of the eligible buildings and the residents that live in them are without any access to any support measures for renovation. And that should be the argument that we're using, and not that we are supporting the involvement of energy poor people in the 4% of the renovated buildings. And unfortunately, that seems to continue in the next phase of the recovery and resilience mechanism, and that's the major issue that we are facing. What's the situation regarding energy poverty? And we really better know it quite well in order to manage to design the future programs at a better level. So we did some research. This research is probably already a bit outdated because it uses 2018 data, but it's still quite indicative of what's the real situation on the ground. So basically, if people afford proper normal heating, and not even to 21 degrees, as Anka was detailing, we allowed 20% less than that because we are not expected to heat up every single premise and the common areas. Even then, about half of the population would be in risk of energy poverty. The first 3 income deciles for sure would be in a situation of energy poverty, but the risk of not being able to cover their normal expenses is for the first 5 income decile. If we go for renovating of these buildings, the impacts are immediate. So if we do regular renovation, we are taking 3 income deciles more or less out of the risk. And another one, if we do deep energy retrofitting. And it's quite normal that that should be the direction that we are going to. We did another calculation, and that's what would happen if we transform the subsidies for heating for coal and wood to renovation subsidies. And it seems that the public budget would be on benefit in a very reasonable period of time. And that's something that also must happen in the next year, and we have the unique chance. Of course, that should be connected to the increase of the scope of the renovation. And with 100% will be left out with less than 1% renovation rate. So we need to attract additional financing, and this financing must come obviously from the owners of the properties. They're the ones that bear the responsibility for the renovation. Of course, we must keep full support for the energy poor parts of the population. The first 3 income deciles as it stays now, but then we need to differentiate the support measures. Of course, we must keep the support in certain shapes, in certain instruments for most of the other parts of the society, but still we must do enough to start attracting private financing in the renovation in order to increase the scope of the renovation. What is happening now is that in the different strategies that we are having in Bulgaria, there are quite contradictory instruments that are being provisioned, and some are in design. This is one of the major contradictions that we have in documents that have a time lapse of less than a year, actually. But actually, probably one thing that seems to be starting to take some kind of a shape is the National Decarbonization Fund. It's now being under design, supported by the European Investment Bank, and probably it will come into existence somewhere in 2023, 2024, but we don't have that time. We have also quite ambitious targets in the long-term renovation strategy, and unfortunately, the situation is that with the approach of keeping the 100% grant financing in the recovery and resilience plans, we are nowhere near to meeting these targets that we set up ourselves in the renovation strategy. And this can, as I said, only be solved via attracting additional market-based financing to the renovation process. What do we have in the recovery and resilience plans? Well, we don't know. We already said that. That scheme that I'm using here is actually from the second draft. I've added a few things, but I want to emphasize with this scheme that we still do not understand at policy-making level what we need to do and what's the unique chance that we have now in that time of the history in order to do real reforms. Because the real reform is that one, increasing the depth, the scope, and the private participation in the renovation. That is the reform that we need. Actually, here we have a reform which sounds quite strange to my opinion, energy poverty definition. A definition itself is not a reform. It is a tool, and we have to apply it to promote the reforms. Under this reform, energy poverty definition, we have the investment in multifamily buildings, some kind of an investment of single family buildings, which for the time being were spared from the 100% financing, but there are some indications, I don't know, that might come into that sector again. It's not going to be really productive. And street lighting, which I'm not going to comment, just not going to comment. So that's one of the reforms that's stated in the plan. Okay, it's good, but we must change our thinking. We must differentiate the reforms from the tools that we are using to promote the reforms. And here we have actually good tools, proper tools, but the reforms are not at the forefront. They're not giving us the guiding light that we need to have. And basically what Radi mentioned is also, has also some relation to energy poverty, the program for investment in small-scale renewables at individual households. We still have to see how it shapes out in the last version of the plan, but it's a step definitely in the right direction. We need, however, to expand that to empowering energy communities in the proper sense of the concept, which we still don't see, unfortunately, in the plan. So last concluding slides of what we do as an effect in order to try to feed into the discussion and propose some working solutions. We try to do some research. Basically, that's what we do in general. And the research that we're doing at the moment is actually how can we engage energy poor households in order to make the reform in the renovation program meaningful. And yes, we'll be looking to study a lot of households, offering them proper energy advice and showing them the benefits on paper and in real discussions with energy consultants. We would combine that with surveys of their behavior and also with surveys for the indoor air quality parameters, which has never been done before. So that's something that, in our opinion, is very important. And please take note of that picture here. I'll come to that back a little bit later. Actually, we've started. I'm in the city of Gabrovo at the moment, and in the city of Gabrovo, we started working with Homeowners Association. And I must tell you that basically they all signed up to the idea of being studied, being involved in the research. Of course, we are giving them the free energy audit that they need, the free energy advice. But I think that's a reasonable deal for both of the parties. And it wouldn't happen if we didn't have the examples. It wouldn't happen really if we didn't have the examples. This is a real life situation from a month ago, where there's a building that's half renovated and half not renovated. And the people from the non-renovated parts are signing because they see the benefits that they have for their comfort, for their well-being, for their incomes, for their ability to make their ordinary expenses. And basically, then that's my last slide. That's actually one of the reasons that we are so insistent on that, because with the fact that we are not working as well as we should on the depth and the scope of the renovation, now we have the situation when buildings are actually losing their value. And energy poverty, in terms of not being able to maintain proper condition of the building, is actually leading to economic poverty. Energy poverty and economic poverty are not one and the same, but one may lead to another, because the building with number 11 that you saw on the previous slide actually doesn't hold any market value compared to the building on the left. And that is really a bad thing for the people that still have some property. And this may easily be the only property of the people that are living in this building number 11. And we really must think about that. And we also must think that this is actually, you know, the labor, the money, the, if you wish, the sweat and the blood of our parents that are in there in the construction of building number 11, and we are wasting it with not maintaining the buildings that we have. So thanks a lot for your attention, and I'm open for any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Drago. Indeed, very informative presentation. Now I will give the floor to my colleague, Svetosław, who will be the host of the following discussion, discussing the examples from Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania.
So hello again, everyone. I would kindly invite all of the panelists to turn on their cameras, and I would like this to be more of a discussion, not so much questions posed from our side, but a discussion involved that we're all involved in it. So you can just pose some questions to the other participants, and basically we're doing this in order to learn what is working in certain country, what it's not working, how we can solve our common problems, because we saw in the presentations that we have quite a lot of common problems, especially with solid fuel, wood burning, for example, with quite large amount of energy poverty, with a low rate of the renovation wave. So I just want to start with one question to one of the panelists, to Benedek Javor, and I would like to ask him what is the situation in Budapest around energy poverty and what has been done in your city in the last couple of years. How is actually the whole renovation wave effort going on in the city, in the capital?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. It's really an honor to be here and to discuss this very important issue with you. Regarding the city of Budapest, of course, we cannot speak about the city without speaking about the country itself. As in the Hungarian governance system, which is highly centralized, the local governments have very limited competencies, and also the budgetary financial room for maneuver is quite limited, and very few own resources are available for programs in energy efficiency and alleviating energy poverty. So what is going on in Budapest is mostly embedded to the national programs, which are quite properly and in a very comprehensive way was introduced by Nora Feldmar, so there is very few to add to her presentation. The problem is that in Hungary for years, I would say that almost for a decade, there is no comprehensive program to support efforts to alleviate energy poverty and for building renovation programs. What we had originally, which targeted households and residential buildings, at the end of the day, the Hungarian government asked for a modification at the European Commission to transform this original program in a way that finally it financed the renovation of governmental and church-owned buildings and not residential buildings. So even the money which was originally given by the European Union to residential renovation programs finally was decanalized to renovate governmental and church building stock, which I think is quite a shameful action. And there were no any additional program. Nora mentioned that there is a general building renovation program, but it's not targeting energy efficiency investment, And the way it is designed ensures that only the higher or the upper classes are able to get access to this program. So they are absolutely not good to target lower income groups and the households and social groups the most in need. In Budapest, the new Budapest leadership, the new mayor was elected at the end of 2019. We completely redrafted the city's climate strategy and environmental program and building renovation with a special focus on residential buildings and the most vulnerable social groups is one of the most important elements of the program. It was adopted this April, so now we have the climate strategy and the environmental program, and intensive building renovation programs are part of it. Still, the big question, of course, the financing. And here comes the issue, which was already also mentioned by Nora, that where this financing could come from. And one idea is, of course, the RRF or the national RRP. But in fact, as Nora explained, the RRP has its limits. And just a smaller part of the RRP targets building renovation programs, and they are not really effective in targeting the low income groups. On the other hand, some parts of the program are limited to the most disadvantaged regions of the country. And of course, Budapest as a city is not one of them. So those programs cannot be applied in the city, while energy poverty is a major problem in the city. So what we see that the RRP is not really a good source for comprehensive energy efficiency and renovation programs with the social aspect in Budapest. We are following closely the negotiations around the ERDF and cohesion funds as the operational programs are under discussion between the national government and the European Commission. And what we see that the energy efficiency and the environmental operational program has slightly better approach, because in the RRP, Nora also explained that the main problem is that what is there for household or residential building renovation related to energy issues is simply the electrification of heating with the applying of solar panels, which is a highly ineffective way of spending the money. As before, first of all, we should renovate the buildings, and then we can go to perhaps electrifying the heating systems. And to do so before the renovation, it's simply heating the streets with expensive electricity, most probably coming from fossil and nuclear sources, as also it was indicated by Nora. So the RRP has a very bad approach. The Environment and Energy Efficiency Operational Program has a better approach. It's really targeting building renovation and energy efficiency investments first, but the two programs has nothing to do with each other. So there is no any guarantee that the energy efficiency investments from the operational program, from ERDF and cohesion funds, will target the same buildings which are electrified from the RRP. So there is no coherence between the different European funding streams. Still, we try to, we are in discussion with the national government and the Commission as well to form the operational program in a way that it could the most effectively contribute to a vast energy efficiency and renovation investment or program in the country. But still there are some problems. For example, in the EEOP, so the operational program, the final recipients of the EU funds are the energy companies. And the energy companies, of course, they have their own interests and priorities, but they are not necessarily the same priorities what the city has or what the residential building owners, so the households, the citizens have. And we believe that that's a major shortcoming of the Hungarian plan, that finally, even the energy efficiency program will serve or will be designed in a way which serves much more the interest of the energy companies than that of the households in need. And keeping all this in mind, there is an additional potential source for a massive or mass renovation program in the city, and that's the European Investment Bank, which in the framework of the Green New Deal, and there were some talks about that before in this conference, it is started to be turned into a green bank or a climate bank. And in Budapest, what we see that perhaps a strong cooperation with the EIB, still there are some limits to that, but this is a political issue, so let's put it aside here and now. That it's not so easy to get access to loans even from the EIB for opposition municipalities in Hungary. But still we believe, as it was indicated previously, some energy efficiency investments pay back in a reasonable time frame. Bank loans and EIB loans could be a perfect source to finance energy efficiency investments in the city. So we are going ahead. We also have negotiations with the EIB to start a vast energy efficiency renovation program in Budapest with EIB support and cooperation of the EIB, the city of Budapest, the districts, energy companies, banks, and the households, with help of setting up one-stop shops for applications to help the citizens' application to programs and so on and so forth. We hope that in the coming years we will be able to turn this plan and this dream into reality and start a massive renovation wave in the city, mostly financed by EU sources.
Thank you, Benedek, for your view on the renovation of Budapest. And I forgot to say your title, that you're the head of representation of the Budapest to the European Union. And I would really like, because I got a sign that you have to leave in a few minutes. So if there are some questions from the other panelists to you, now it's the time for them. And I would really ask all the panelists to say a couple of words to present themselves in a sentence or two, the ones that we haven't heard up to now. So any questions to Benedek?
I have a raised hand, if I may. My name is Clara Volintiru. I'm an associate professor at the Bucharest University of Economic Studies, and I've been working with Babes Bolyai for some time now on their amazing projects in the field of energy policy and energy consumption. Now, my question to Mr. Benedict, and thank you, I really enjoyed your presentation now. I've been following the aspect of subnational initiatives in the climate action field. I listened to Mayor Budapest last week at Bratislava presenting some of his initiatives in this field. And as you well know, there is such a huge disparity between Western cities in Europe and Eastern cities in Europe in terms of climate action initiatives. And my question to you would be, what other cities in Hungary, apart from Budapest, would you highlight as benchmark practices in this type of subnational initiatives in terms of renovation wave, but not only that, broader strategic vision to tackle climate action goals?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good observation and question, and indeed, I agree fully with you that there is this huge gap between Western and Eastern member state cities, and that's a problem because many of the European Union's programs are not taking into consideration that the different financial means which those settlements or those cities have. And in some cases, like in the Horizon program, they are designed in a way that most probably only wealthy Western European cities are going to be able to apply. For example, in the Horizon program, they have this climate neutral and smart cities program, which has a sub-program called 100 Cities for Climate Neutrality by 2030. But that program gives sources only to initiate the climate strategies of the cities, and the funding should arrive from other sources. And while in the program it is mentioned that ERDF, cohesion, RRF sources should contribute to cities to become climate neutral by 2030, it's not in. There is no coherence between this statement in the Horizon program and the programming of the ERDF cohesion policy programs and the RRP. So there is no mentioning of the Climate Neutral and Smart Cities program in the RRPs or the operational programs in the member states, which means that finally there will be no earmarked or targeted sources in those financing streams to support the cities' efforts to climate neutrality, which means that finally those cities will be able to participate in the program which have their own resources to be able to finance the climate transition of the cities. And this will create a huge gap between East and West. Secondly, your other question is about Hungarian cities. Of course, it's not only about Budapest. So there are many other cities, and we see very good examples in cities in the countryside, bigger or smaller ones as well. Sometimes there are really good initiatives, pilot projects. But the problem again, that as there is a lack of a comprehensive national program for energy efficiency and building renovation with a focus on alleviating energy poverty, even those cities, they do not have the sources to finance those programs. So what we have in the countryside is quite similar to what we have in Budapest, that it's more like pilot projects or small-scale initiatives with a couple of dozens of buildings involved in the program, but it's not really a vast renovation wave affecting or involving most of the buildings in our cities. So in a way, we see that there is intensive efforts and commitment in many of the cities in the countryside. I can mention Szombathely or Szeged, Salgótarján. We know very good initiatives there. But there is no really the financing backbone of those programs, so we don't have the EU money, and the RRP, as far as we see it now, is not really an effective tool to give a boost to those programs on the local level. And also we see some difficulties and shortcomings of the operational program draft, what we have. So ERDF and cohesion funds are also going to have a limited effect or contribution to this renovation wave. And altogether, the problem that I think that the country is lacking a comprehensive energy efficiency strategy, which involves the cities as well, which is backed by national and EU funds, and which makes it possible to renovate the building stock, which is in Hungary, as in most of the countries in the region, are in a very, very bad shape. They are highly inefficient from an energy perspective. So that would be the number one, or that should be the number one priority of our countries, where we should allocate EU funds. Not only to alleviate energy poverty, of course, this should be an important goal. And we've seen in Dragomir's presentation, the EDEPI energy poverty scores, that Hungary is perhaps the last, or together with Bulgaria, where energy poverty is the biggest problem. So we should concentrate on energy poverty, but also from a climate perspective. So that's the cheapest and most effective and best way of emission cuts and mitigation efforts in the country. But there is no any sign that the government understood this, and that the EU funds, which are really a huge amount of money together with the RRP and the next MFF, that they are going to be effectively contribute to this energy poverty alleviation and climate action in the country.
Thank you for your comprehensive answer. I now want to give the word to my colleague Gennady. He wanted to share something with you very quickly.
Thank you very much. Today I wanted to try to give a graphic overview of what we have ever had and what we are now planning for the next decade as funding in Bulgaria. It will slightly overlap with already what Dragomir said, and please bear with me, I'm not the chart wizard, but I think that it would give an interesting overview of some of the gaps that we are really facing. I don't know if you can see a pointer. Remote control. Well, I'm afraid. Can you see the cursor of my mouse on the screen? Super. Okay, so this dot here, it's not an impurity on your screen. It's actually the very first multifamily building that has been done, to my knowledge, almost back in 2005. It was actually done with the help and promotion of Habitat Bulgaria, and it's a multifamily building that was renovated in Zakharna Fabrika district. Then there were about 50 multifamily buildings renovated through the program led by the United Nations Development Program just before they were out of the country. We continued with predominantly credit scheme called RECO, which had a grant component under Kozloduy decommissioning fund. But bear in mind, this was purely a private initiative, so it was not so much led by national policy. So here, between what happened under the UNDP and the actual national renovation program, there was a big programs that gave a stop and go feeling to the whole renovation effort in the country. Basically, there was a gap which made the business give up a little bit. Part of what was created as capacity was already lost. Then we had, under the previous programming period, 2007-2013, yet another amount of money, which then was influxed into the national renovation programs. I think that this happened also with the money for the period 2014-2020. Drago, correct me if I'm wrong. And we had 2 times by half a billion euro that were invested in the multifamily programs. Now, what we see in the next decade, I hope that the screen doesn't interfere too much with the vision of the viewers, but we have the still unspent money for heating under OP environment for the previous programming period that will be disbursed only in the N+3 period at the moment. We have another 60 million euro. Sorry, this is the 60 million. Then we have 16 million through the LIFE projects that are currently implemented by municipalities until 2024. The 700 million envisaged by the national, by the Recovery and Resilience Plan that we know so far, as Drago said, you know, this can be outdated already because we don't know what is going to be the last version that's going to be submitted. 240 million roughly is under the program for development of the regions, and 220 million with an asterisk we put here under program environment for the current actually programming period 2021-2027. I put it as with an asterisk because there is both targeted measures on the domestic heating and green infrastructure, and we still don't know how those are actually divided within this funding. What you see in the gray area has been has covered the more or less the renovation of about 11% of the residential area in the country for more than one decade. In the next decade, this is the only part of the funding that we see now, and it's roughly the same as what we've seen before. So we cannot expect, if we continue with the high grant components, to really see a significant jump in the pace of renovation. And I think that it would be key at the moment to really manage to provide the leverage to bring in the private funding, the more well-off households to be able to invest and provide their own contribution if we want to really speed up the renovation process, not using only public funds, but really mobilizing the private capital in the country. We still don't know what we can expect in the next decade from the national budget, if there would be any adequate financial instruments there, what is going to happen with criticized by us heating aid that is provided to numerous households year after year for the winter season, and that only perpetuates their energy poverty. Of course, there will be yet another programming period starting as of 2027. But with these remarks, you know, I think that still we would be no further than what we achieve in the current decade if we have only that what we see at the moment.
Thank you, Gennady. One of our panelists told us that he has to leave in a few minutes, so I want to give the word to Bogumil. Bogumil, the stage is yours. Say a few words about yourself and your organization first.
Thank you very much. I represent Bulgarian National Association Active Consumers, and we've been active in fighting energy poverty in the past few years, and I hope in another years to come. And I will talk a little bit more about this on Friday morning. But now I just like to elaborate a little bit on Drago's presentation, because we have a full consensus on one subject, and it is that the approach that was implemented in Bulgaria in the past few years was not the best one. We saw that spending $1 billion levs produced only, the result was that 2,000 buildings achieved Class C energy efficiency. And the question is, could we be able to achieve more? Could we be able to take the citizens' energy on board? Because there is a huge energy in citizens, and we can see it if you just go to any Bulgarian city, and you will see this picture of people trying to make their own partial insulations of the multifamily buildings. Why they do this? Because they believe that they should do something about energy efficiency, but there is no mechanism that can unite this energy and they go together and do something. And I have no official statistic, but since this program started several years ago, and they promised people that the state will finance 100% of this renovation process. And then you see that suddenly these people who previously partly insulated their buildings, they simply stopped doing this. Why? Because they said, oh, I have to wait. The state will come one day to my door and they will take care of me. This is the best way to lose these citizens' energy, to demotivate people to do anything about their own homes. And that's why I believe that all the financial mechanisms, and we see from many presentations and many analysis that the money exists, that there are, the money is not so big problem, but we need to find the most effective model how to spend those money so that we can mobilize the people's money and people's energy and to achieve the best possible results. I think that every policy should be centered around the citizens, around the people. And not around the companies that will take the money to implement this and other measure. Once the policy is centered around people, then you will see the process speeding up in a very high speed compared to previous. I'm ready to defend this position, and I hope that every next government will not forget this, because we have this lesson. Okay, everyone can make mistakes, but let's learn from this mistake. And of course, we also care about energy poor consumers. So we defend the position that 100% support should be given to those people. But the other people who are not poor, economically and energy poor, they need to be they should take the initiative of this process, and the state and all other actors can only support this process. I hope this message is clear, and I'm really sorry that I have to leave because I have a plane to catch, and I hope to be able to discuss more on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Bogomil, for your opinion. Now I would like to invite the other panelists who haven't got the chance to get on the stage to quickly present themselves in a couple of sentences and maybe ask a question or just state their opinion. And I just want to add that we have 15 more minutes, actually 16 more minutes to finish this panel, this discussion. So we have to be quite efficient.
So let me not lose time, if I may. My name is Maria Petreanu. I'm a senior researcher in the National Institute for Building Research in Bucharest, in Romania, and I'm leading the cluster for promotion of nearly zero energy buildings in Romania. I'm a building expert on energy performance, and yeah, I don't know where to start. Just to complement what Anca presented for the Romanian situation. Indeed, in the national RRP, there is no focus on energy poverty. There is some, I don't know, soft but light mention of energy poverty in some places, but there is no focus. There is focus on poverty in other pillars, not on the green transition or the energy one, but apparently those pillars are having different speeds. So there is no connection between energy and poverty. But on the other side, I'm sure that in the renovation implementation, in the building renovation projects, there will be something that it was previously used and it will be used in the regional operational program. That means that the apartment, because it's focused on residential multifamily buildings only, in the apartment buildings where there will be apartments that include households in energy poverty, they will be backed up by the local or state budget in order to support their effort in the renovation. So at least this is what we can say at this moment. On the other side, I'm coming back to the fact that is no mention on, and really there is no mention, Anka, on single family houses. And we had, together with other associations in energy efficiency, we had some interventions to the central government in Romania and even at the commission level, because we supported higher level of allocation for energy efficiency in buildings in the RRP. And we noticed that, the lack of single family buildings, and the very polite and politically correct answer for the Commission was that there is a national decision on that. So in fact, yes, the national decision was to put only public buildings on the renovation and multifamily buildings. And if we are coming back in the history with a national program for multifamily buildings and the regional operational program, there is a common situation with Bulgaria that we are trying now to change a bit together with Dragomir in a project on OIKI funding, the Congregate, in which we are trying to engage the owners in the renovation. Is the fact that due to the support up to 100% from the state, from the public funding, not only from the state, of the building renovation in multifamily buildings, there is a passive attitude. So getting to government, getting to cities, getting to citizens and show them the benefits, it's what we can do and we shall do. It is not enough. Now we are changing the level of performance by law in Romania. So after 3 years of changing the regulation, we are now in the phase of approving the technical regulation, and the levels of minimum requirements in terms of energy performance for the building renovation are very close to the nearly zero energy building levels, which is good because I'm happy with that, but it will certainly block the financing on building renovation because it's impossible. And on the other side, the state, the authorities, let's say the administrators of the funding, public funding, they are trying to do more with less. So this is a very big contradiction. On the other side, looking on the predictions that I've heard, it is hard to believe, but I heard about this. On the regional operation program in the new multi-annual financing exercise for European funds, it will be like 5 billion euro for energy efficiency in buildings, which on one hand matches the financial projection of the long-term renovation strategy in the financing scheme for public funding. But the financing scheme, it's almost 13 billion. So we have to leverage the 5 billion with private funding, and we cannot do that with passive attitude. With what we are doing now for the residential buildings and public buildings only. And last year, and this will be my last idea, last thing, after 1 year of preparations, and I was part of the technical guide development, the administration of environmental fund, taking money from the environmental fund, launched a program for single family houses, which was really great. But it was launched in September, on 15th of September, with a budget of 100 million euro for the initial call. But it refuses to deliver, even if we are more than 9 months delayed now. We have like 15,000 applications that will cover more than the allocated budget, but not a single project submission was evaluated. So it's a very beautiful program. It's a premiere in Romania in the last 30 years. It offered 60% of the investment back to the people. But in the context of energy poverty, this is not the right instrument, because the energy poor households have to take the upfront investment and they to take back 60%, and they will have to invest like 35,000 euro, which is crazy. So we need investment, we need to leverage the public funding, and in order to do that, we need a public awareness, we need communication of the benefits to the owners, and we need financial instruments to complement, to back up the public funding, because otherwise there will be no contribution from public source, private sources. Thank you.
Thank you too. Now, if there is anyone else who hasn't had the opportunity, I think maybe Clara.
Yeah, I think I'm the last one in. I'm going to try to be extremely brief, mainly because of time, but also because Anca and Mr. Petran have already covered so much ground on the Romanian case study. Now, I think I would add just a few comments. The first would be that there is a very poor understanding of the realities on the ground in terms of energy poverty in Romania, much like in other countries in the region. So there are some advancements in terms of studies, mainly conducted by the UBB in Romania, but there is still no provision for technical assistance for institutional mapping of beneficiaries, targeted beneficiaries, as part of the RRP or any other type of financial instrument that would allow public authorities to have a clear perspective on who the potential beneficiaries are and what their characteristics are and their specific needs. So I think that's a huge problem in designing evidence-based policy making. And I think it's very similar to what we've encountered with the needs, the not in education, employment or training problem in Romania, because there was a substantial category of the youth population in this poverty risk situation. And the measures that were designed to tackle the issue in Romania were mostly designed to create financial instruments for institutions without mapping the actual beneficiaries. So the impact was very poor. And I'm seriously afraid that there will be a similar situation with the energy poverty measures that are being developed at the moment. The few energy poverty measures that are being developed, as was mentioned before, the NRP would have it would have been a good solution, but it's only marginally mentioning energy poverty within the broader framework of energy efficiency and not through targeted measures. Now, in terms of the legislative framework in Romania, I think there were some advancements. And from the study that Anca and her team at UBB have developed a few years ago on energy poverty in Romania up until today, there is a specific improvement in terms of the definition of energy poverty in Romania, the vulnerable consumer, in the sense that you have now the introduction of this accessibility or isolation factor in the draft legislation for energy poverty, which I think creates the foundation of more targeted measures for rural, non-urban, non-clustered energy poverty groups that, again, Anca already mentioned. Which brings me to another point I would like to make in terms of renewables. We are talking a lot about what are the renewables we plan to use in Romania and elsewhere. Well, Romania has a very high rate of renewables, but they're not necessarily sustainable renewables. So 85% of the rural population in Romania is using wood, so biomass, but based on wood to warm their houses. So this is obviously not a situation. This is obviously a situation of energy poverty risk, and this is obviously not a situation that is necessarily sustainable in terms of the broader long-term development patterns. 50% of the population in general in Romania is using wood to warm their houses. I think there is an opportunity for solar within the new financial framework, multi-annual financial framework, resilience and recovery framework. But as far as it looks now, it is mainly designed for businesses and not residential users. So that's another issue that we need to be aware of. Now, coming back to rural urban, we had at the World Bank an analysis of what's called local human development index, which comprises an indicator of energy poverty or energy, let's say, consumption capacity. And there is obviously a very large disparity between communities, localities that are part of an urban functional area, which again brings us to the clustering aspect, and those that are not. So obviously those that are not, those that are more remote, they're more poverty stricken in general terms of human development and in energy poverty terms. Now, a final point I would make on this aspect is that in rural areas, private sector investment has the largest impact as opposed to public sector investments. And this brings us to the point made on Hungary earlier, the fact that local communities have to shoulder a lot of the burden of these projects, and local governments in urban areas have the resources necessary to conduct such investments, while rural areas lack them completely. So we need to figure out ways to bring private investments in rural areas, or to create really comprehensive programs at the national level, programs that will not be sucked in by urban beneficiaries only. I don't know, I think I should stop here because I think we're running out of time, but I'm happy to expand on any other aspect.
Thank you. I had a question for Anca, but I think that I will save it for email. Now I would like to ask Anca and Drago if they have to say some final words, because we haven't really let you to speak in this session, for which I'm really sorry.
Thank you, Sergio, for conducting and for leading this panel, and topics that have been put forward are so diverse and yet so common to the region that we can basically take one speaker from one country and basically nominate him for another to speak. I think this creates a large opportunity, a powerful voice in the region, and leverage, and an opportunity to cooperate, to identify these common challenges and common solutions. And yes, I think there's a large opportunity to reach hands together and try to find ways to influence European policies. That's one thing that we need to influence, need intervention from the ground, from the grassroots. But as we have seen, and many of the speakers have pointed out, European policies are not enough, because it is basically the national program that might at some points lack more, let's say, more political will to create opportunities. So there is large opportunity for influence at the level of national policy making. How should these things be done? I do not know. I do not have an answer. We have a large catalog of problems that we, I think, we have, each of us on our national territories. And I think it's quite optimistic for me that we have started this ferment, this discussion between NGOs, between, let's say, policy influencers that we are, each in our little corner, and yes, developing this kind of ferment and not stopping it right here at this event would be would create opportunities for discussion and maybe influence. Thank you.
I could take the floor for a second as well, because it was actually what was my initial reaction to say the same as Senka did, that if we put one of ourselves in the neighboring country, I believe the message would be very, very similar and well understood by the audience there. But just to top up on that, that shows to me that we really need more knowledge in different areas that are important parts of the system. And basically we need more knowledge in the policymaking sector, and that I thought was felt quite well by most of the presentations. But what we usually underestimated, Horia rightfully mentioned that, is that we don't work enough to upbring or to improve the knowledge of the end beneficiaries of the programs, which would be also our major investors in the next years. And there's no other way, and we all understand that. And without having the right knowledge, without having the right arguments, bringing to the right motivation, it's going to be very hard to convince people that are not in depth within the topic to take real action. And that's something that we really have to take care of. We didn't mention that extensively the financial sector. There's also quite important knowledge and attitude gaps there that we need to overcome. But there are other forums that we are using for that. And I think the relations that we establish between the professional community and the financial sector would be very important in the future. But most of all, and again, communication, intensive communication, bringing people up to the party. Let's hope it's going to be a party one day, and not and it's not the sometimes dire situation that we're having at the moment. So yeah, that's the last message from our side, and thanks a lot to everybody for the really meaningful and how should I say, very comforting from one side, on the other side, constructive messages that we have had here on this roundtable.
Thanks a lot, Drago, and thanks a lot to all the panelists. I really hope that we can continue these discussions that we just started. We barely scratched the surface of what we have to say, and I really hope that we can continue this discussion not only next year in our conference again, but maybe throughout the year in planning some joint efforts in addressing the problems that we stated today. And with that, I'm finishing this panel, and I would really I would invite you to join tomorrow too, if you have the time to join the 4th day of our Heating and Renovation Conference. The 4-day will be targeted to businesses, mostly to the solutions that are working, heating solutions, cooling solutions, combined solutions with renewable energy systems. And then we're going to have a discussion panel at the second part of our day of how can we really decarbonize the construction sector here in Bulgaria. But the target mostly will be on new build houses, not so much on renovation of houses, but how we can really reach the NZ targets that we have to, and is there a way to do so? Because not only we have to renovate the existing stock, but we have to start building better in order not to renovate the new builds in a couple of years. So thank you all for joining. And with that, I really wish you a pleasant day. And yeah, see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah,
See you
goodbye.
tomorrow.
Bye-bye.